Good evening and welcome to the February 27, 2024 meeting of the Milton Select Board. Before we begin, please join us as we recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for that. Item 3 is public comment. By policy, we allow up to 21 minutes in total for public comment and up to 3 minutes per speaker. And I will time the 3 minutes. The town administrator will time the 21 minutes. I will apologize in advance for being strict with the time limits in order to comply with the policy and be fair to everyone and also to comply with the law. So what we typically do is we start with the in-person public comment, and then we alternate between in-person and online. So if we have someone for public comment, please come in, and if you could sign the sheet, and then give us your name and address, and I will let you know when you're at 2 minutes and 30 seconds if that works for you. So that
does work for me. Thank you.
Great.
Kathleen Tyrrell, 169 Whittier Road. The September 22nd letter from the Select Board to the EOHLC did not ask for reclassification of our MBTA status. It asked for clarification. I understand the response spoke to reclassification, but the town's letter did not. Prior to the August 8th Select Board meeting, a draft letter to the MBTA seeking reclassification was prepared by the Select Board and Planning Board chairs and 2 staff members. However, before the August 8th meeting, one member of the Select Board diluted the draft with page after page after page of edits and redactions. 3 members of the Select Board voted to send this watered-down letter that simply asked for an explanation of our rapid transit classification. Thank you, members Wells and Musto, for supporting the stronger letter. It's disturbing that the Select Board member who made the edits and redactions has said publicly that he does not support reclassification. He is a part owner of a single-family home on Capon Street with an agreement to sell said property in 24.5 months. The value of this property would have increased significantly had Article 1 passed. This member still has not disclosed this, nor has he recused himself from deliberations regarding the zoning and reclassification. I believe the 10% Ethics Commission exclusion does not apply here. There are 28,000 citizens in Milton. Clearly, 2,800 people do not own property along the Elliott Street, Blue Hills Parkway corridor, the only area where single-family homes could have been converted into multi-family units. As of the February 5th Yes campaign filing with the town clerk, this member was tied for the 5th largest individual donor. At this point in time, I have no plans to file with the Ethics Commission. I'm not interested in punishment. I'm interested in recusal going forward and some reflection on whether resignation is in order. Had this member recused himself, this never would have gone to town meeting. The citizens never would have borne the cost of a 2-night special town meeting and the February 14th election, my opinion. Additionally, I feel duped by this town meeting presentation slide that says the Select Board challenged classification twice with 2 different agencies. 2
seconds, Mr. Al.
2 letters seeking reclassification do not exist. 1 letter is questionable at best. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, so now we will go to the online, and we have 1 hand raised, Ms. Elizabeth Dillon. Oh, go ahead. And Ms. Dillon, if you could unmute yourself and give your name and address, and you'll have up to 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when we're at 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Thanks so much. My name is Elizabeth Dillon. I live at 79 Governors Road. I just wanted to speak briefly. I was really disheartened to learn of the state's decision to sue the town of Milton, but I'm not surprised. I hope that the issue will be resolved quickly, whether through this litigation or more preferably through the planning board submitting a compliant plan so that further litigation, will be unnecessary. I also wanted to say I was extremely heartened to see so many people in Milton turn out to vote in the February 14th special election. And I would encourage all Miltonians to come out and vote again in the upcoming April elections. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Dillon. All right.
Short but sweet.
Yes. And now let's go back to the in-person.
Hello. My name is Jay Funling. I live at 39 Sias Lane, and I'm coming here tonight to ask the Select Board to establish a committee for long-term budget planning. It seems likely that the town will be in a position to need an operating override a year from now. In order to have the best outcome for the town, we should have transparent, long-term planning to ensure any override sets us up for future success and does not just react to a budget shortfall presented to us for 1 year. When asking the residents to increase their own taxes to increase services, it is incumbent on the town government to clearly state not only how it will be spent in 1 year, but what the plan is over multiple years. For models, we can look to the towns of Hingham and Arlington. Hingham created a sustainable budget task force in August 2021. They created a report with a long-term plan which was communicated to the town, and the residents approved an override in 2023 with over 60% of the vote. Arlington has had a long-range planning committee since 2004. This has led to several successful overrides, including one in 2023 with, again, over 60% of the vote. If done well, this will be a lot of work. And to prepare for a possible override in 16 months from now, we need to start not next spring, not this fall, but as soon as possible. This is why I'm asking you to either establish a committee at your earliest convenience or to reopen the warrant to allow a town meeting to establish a committee in May. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Funling. Now we will go back to the online participants. Is it *9, Nick? So if you're participating by phone, please hit star. Oh, there's no phones. All right. So please use the raise hand icon if you'd like to participate in Citizen Speak as an online participant. I don't see any yet.
My phone's off.
And I don't see any now. Why don't we go back? Not seeing any hands in the online participants. Let's go back to the in-person participants to see if we have anyone additional.
Thank you very much, and good evening. My name is Lizzie Carroll, 37 Randolph Avenue. I'm here tonight in my capacity as chair of the school committee. Over the past several weeks, the school committee has affirmed and just again this morning reiterated our support for the school department's needs-based budget as proposed. It has been discussed in several of our meetings, as I mentioned, over the past number of weeks. And I wanted to join tonight just to share this perspective from the school committee, even as we understand the context of our town's limited resources and the role that you all as members of the select board play in considering so many various factors as you build the budget for our entire town. We definitely appreciate your consideration of the important needs of our schools, educators, and students throughout Milton. As elected leaders of the Milton Public Schools, as members of the school committee, it is our responsibility to support and advocate for the needs of our students. And that is what I am here to represent. We have discussed, as it's become clear, that the needs-based budget as proposed represents not frivolous nice-to-haves, but true, real, urgent, and in fact overdue in many cases needs. To continue to defer on those needs will just exacerbate some of the challenges that we have faced as a school district and postpone our ability to truly meet all of the needs of all of our students. I wanted to mention to you and to the community that this morning There was a finance subcommittee meeting of the school committee, cross-posted as a full school committee meeting. There was a presentation there that thoroughly detailed the needs-based budget, as well as some information and analysis presented by our school committee member, Mark Loring, that really provided a lot of important context for the way that Milton has continually underinvested in our schools over the years. We have continued to fund our schools in about the bottom
30 seconds, Ms.
quartile
Cow.
of towns across the Commonwealth. And as we thank you all for your consideration of our needs, understanding everything that you do need to consider, we just wanted to uplift that, not just to you all, but to all of our community members. And thank you for your service and your time tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. All right, going back to the online, we do now have a hand raised, and that is Tom Callahan. So if you could promote Mr. Callahan. Mr. Callahan, if you could give your name and address, you'll have up to 3 minutes, and I'll give you a indication when we get to 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Great. Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Tom Callahan from 16 Orono Street. I'm here tonight just to talk about the Attorney General's decision today. Unfortunately, we knew this would happen. We knew because the governor told us that we would lose funding if we were not in compliance, and we have already. We knew because the AG told us that she would sue us, and she did today. The important question now is, what are we going to do as a town, as a united town? I urge you not to use new tax dollars to defend the indefensible. Our planning board must come up with a fully compliant plan and make this lawsuit go away. 2 weeks ago, voters rejected a specific zoning plan, but we had no other plan at the time for voters to consider. East Milton residents clearly don't like this plan. Okay, let's figure out another plan together. The planning board needs to lead on this, and they should be meeting frequently, arguably tomorrow, to accomplish this. But let's not delay anymore. Let's move to restore Milton's reputation and our state funding, do our part for our towns and our region's housing crisis, and bring this town together around a zoning plan that all reasonable Milton residents can feel good about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Callahan. Now going back to the in-person group, is there anyone else who wishes to participate in public comment? Nobody is running up to the table. So how about online? Is there anyone online? Please raise your hand. Or if you're on the phone, press star 9?
Star 9.
Star 9, I got it. Let's press star 9.
Get you a little tattoo on your
I know. I don't see anyone there. I don't see anyone here. We'll give it just another second for people to jump on. Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you for that. Item 4, discussion approval appointment of Thomas McCarthy as Director of Consolidated Facilities.
Mr. Chair, before we start that.
Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wondered if we could move item number 16, public comment response, up to this point right now.
Yeah, I mean, without objection,
No objection.
we can move up public comment response. Is there any objection? Mr. Wells, any objection to moving up public comment response? Okay.
He's good.
All right, so we'll move up public comment response, item 16.
Yes. So thank you, if I could, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
Ms. Bradley.
So I just wanted to respond to our first attendee this evening, and just express that I fully supported the letter that was drafted. I thought that it was appropriate for the Select Board. I appreciated the edits that were suggested, and those edits were voted on by the entire Select Board. So singling one of us out is not something I like to do, although some folks do enjoy that. But I really believe that we are a board, and whether or not we agree on things, there's a vote for it. And so to single somebody out and bring in their personal lives, to me, feels very wrong, and something that has happened to me over the summer. And I want to say it was not wonderful. It was not friendly. It was quite disturbing of what was happening. And so we can make decisions as select board members. You may not like our decisions as select board members. You may not like our votes as select board members. But I would like to just say again, bringing in personal things, and I've said it before, bringing in personal things of our lives, attacking, for me personally, my children online, driving by my house and yelling at me because I did not agree, you did not like something I said in a previous meeting. That is not the way that we build neighbors. That is not the way that we act in, society, I would think. So the comments that were made tonight just is continuing to kind of stir that pot, and I just wanted to address that first before we moved on to the rest of our business, because I feel like it's something that continues to happen, and we're not addressing the fact that our personal lives are personal, and our children, our ex-spouses, I have, a few, they are off limits, and that's just the way it is. So, so you want to attack the way that we vote, attack us personally, write us. We all have emails, all of us. Please write us, reach out to us. But to do this in a public forum, I felt was wrong. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. Mr. Zoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's me. Hi. I'm the problem. It's me. I'm the guy that made the edits to the letter. And I'm not going to, I don't feel like giving oxygen to the personal attacks. If you think that I'm single-handedly responsible for the passage of a state law, for calling a special town meeting, then I wish you'd tell my teenage children how much power I have, because they certainly don't seem to understand how powerful I am. But I do want to just review quickly a couple of the key edits that I think everyone is tearing their hair out, or some people at least are tearing, those who can tear hair out have torn their hair out. So the first and most damning edit, if I may use that word, is that I changed the word review to provide a formal explanation for. So the original letter said, we write to request that the MBTA review its classification of the Mattapan trolley as rapid transit. I suggested that provide a formal explanation for was probably more strong. I don't think the word review says to change. It certainly doesn't say that we should be requesting the MBTA to change its classification. It says review its classification. So if you would like to have a long discussion of the debates of review versus provide a formal explanation for, I'm happy to do that if you're buying the beer. The second edit, I think, that folks really took issue with was that the original letter cited a 1968 acknowledgement that the MBTA did not go forward with a project to convert the Mattapan trolley line to rapid transit by extending the red line from Ashmont to Mattapan Square. That is a decision that is now nearly 50 years old, and I felt like it was problematic for two reasons. One was because it was almost 50 years old, and two, because decisions that were made in and around this town, this Commonwealth, this country in the 60s and 70s around infrastructure were very much grounded in structural racism, very much so. And if you don't agree with me, then please read a history book. And I felt the much more current example of July 18th, 2023 meeting of the MBTA Advisory Board, where the Undersecretary of Transportation, Ms. Monica G. Tibbetts-Nutt, was unable to respond to a question about the timeline for a proposed Mattapan high-speed line renovation, as she was, quote unquote, not briefed on that project, which I felt spoke leagues more to how the state was treating the Mattapan high-speed line, rather than citing a vote that happened in this town 50 years ago that, again, I believe has problematic roots. Later in the letter, I re-emphasized the underinvestment in the Mattapan high-speed line. The original letter said, in the short term, the MBTA can help to rectify the inequity by restoring the proper classification of the Mattapan trolley line and lowering the fares of its passengers in the longer term. And I struck that, and I said, we continue to believe the MBTA must rectify the inequity by immediately prioritizing the proposed Mattapan line transformation project and setting and sticking to a clear and reasonable timeline that could help redress the inequity of the past. In my opinion, Milton has an obligation, and I'm no longer reading from this, Milton has an obligation, as does every community in this state, to address the housing crisis that we face. At the same time, why is the state allowed to delay its renovation of a trolley that provides service to lots of people, including lots of Milton residents, for years without penalty, when we still obviously have some divisions in this town about how we're going to get to compliance, we are immediately penalized for it. Where is the punishment for the state for its continued neglect of a line that services a very largely disadvantaged populations, people of color, people that live in Mattapan that need access to public transportation? Why are they not penalized for that continued disinvestment? And why are we penalized when it takes us a little bit longer to get our story straight? Now, I continue to believe that we should not be reclassified. I believe that from the beginning. I, yes, own a property at 33 Capon Street. It's my ex-wife's house. She is a public school teacher here in Milton. I wish that people would leave her alone. I wish that people would leave my kids alone. I wish that people would stop thinking that I somehow managed to get divorced 2 years before the state passed a law that would somehow make me a multimillionaire. I'm happy that I invested some funds in the Yes campaign. I believe strongly in the message that this town deserves to live up to its obligation. If you have a problem with me, please come up to me and tell me about it. But waving your finger around at a meeting here, at a meeting at the planning board, doesn't do anyone any favors. And I think we're going to hear later from some very thoughtful folks who are going to talk to us about how we can step away from that kind of accusatory, fear-mongering speech and go towards a place where we can really get together and start having conversations as neighbors should. We're not going to agree about everything, but we can certainly agree that we all live in the same town and we deserve to treat each other with respect and dignity. And that was not the finest example of it, but it's water under the bridge for me. I want to move forward. So that's about all I'm going to say about that, other than the fact that I've consulted both with the Ethics Commission and others, and I have not been led to believe that I've done anything wrong, nor have I ever acted in a way that I didn't think was in the strongest, best interests of this town. To suggest otherwise, you just don't know me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Zoll. Other comments? Ms. Musto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that we have to be clear here. When somebody comes here and says certain points, whether we like them or not, we have to listen to what their message was, whether we agree or we don't. I was very critical of the letters that we sent out, and I know you know this, Mr. Zoll. As you had mentioned, you were not in favor of doing any type of letter asking for reclassification. You said it up front, and when those changes were made to the letters, those letters were not strong letters. In fact, they were cited in the brief that we got from the AG, saying basically that we really didn't ask for reclassification when we had opportunities to. So to say that we sort of did, that's untrue. So I think we have to be truthful about that.
Mr. Chair.
Well, let's let.
Excuse me?
That seems like an accusation of a lie.
Just let's let Ms.
Excuse me,
Musto finish.
I'd really appreciate it if I could have my time.
Go for it.
Thank you, please. So I would say that with the original letter that was worked on, that was referred to, our chair of the select board, chair of the planning board worked on it. I believe our planner worked on it, and Mr. Milano worked on it. And that was a pretty good letter. And then we took it apart and we redid the letter. And again, that vote was a split vote, as you were referring to. It was a 3-2 vote on that. I was not one of the supporters because I didn't think it made the strong case for why it should be looked at. I think the other thing here is when we have situations that people question whether we have an issue, an ethical issue, it is always helpful to go to the Ethics Commission and, get a letter or something from them so that it clears the air. And I think that's really important in these kind of situations, especially because this is such a hot topic and it's been brought up, I believe, before. This is the first time it was brought up here. I think it's important to remember that there was a town-wide vote on this, and we need to represent everyone who voted on this issue with with doing the best that we can do for those residents and be respectful of that. And I think that that's very important going forward for any type of a community with this type of a situation, that we want to work together. And I think that I'm disappointed that the Attorney General went right to filing a brief and wouldn't try to work with us. And I don't think that's the right message. And I'm disappointed in that, because I think I would preferred that we try to work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Musto. And, Mr. Zoll, do you want to?
If you have something to say.
I just want to, and again, here we go again, but I do want to try to clarify. We did prepare one letter, and the idea was to send a letter to the MBTA, make the arguments for classification, which we did, but more importantly, to get the MBTA on record as to what their position was, which we did. And then once we got the MBTA on the record, then we went to the agency that makes the decisions, the HLC, using what we got from the MBTA. We went, and the second letter was to the Housing and Livable Communities. I prepared that. I prepared all the materials, and it was the one area, amidst all the disagreement that we had in the fall, it was the one area that there was unanimous consent, unanimous consensus. Everyone on this board agreed that that was an appropriate request for reclassification. I believe you may have had one edit to who we send the letter to, Ms. Musto, but everyone on the board agreed to it, and everyone on the planning board agreed, as I understand it. I don't know they had a vote, but the planning board chair said it was excellent, and I understand that other members of the planning board said that was the one area of consensus that we had. One area, I believe, was the one area of consensus that we had. And so I think it was a good effort that we made. I think it was consensus among both boards and every member on this board to seek reclassification, and I think that should continue. I think that spirit of consensus and collaboration and unanimity should continue, and we should continue those efforts because we did have it on reclassification. We all agreed to it. We all agreed that presentation, that thick presentation that we prepared to HLC, arguing for reclassification, was appropriate, and so I did prepare it. I thought it was a good effort. Everyone agreed. There was consensus, and I think that should continue. So, Mr. Zoll, you have more than that.
Just a final thought.
Oh, Mr. Wells.
Oh, sorry.
Mr. Zoll.
Go ahead, Mr. Wells.
Mr. Wells, and then Mr. Zoll.
Okay, go ahead, Ben. You go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Richard,
Go ahead. Ben can. Go ahead, Richard.
So I thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to talk about the letter because, frankly, we're in a total different boat right now. And, I agreed with you. I was a strong proponent of the original letter. And I don't want to rehash that now because we're in a totally different fight. And I'm fine with that fight because this is really a political fight. And we're going to find out not just on behalf of our residents, but really now on behalf of many residents of the Commonwealth, whether or not this was an appropriate plan or not.
Richard,
I don't, and I hear each of you, and I'm not here to be accusatory. I've had enough rocks thrown at me in my life, and I've disclosed enough things. The only thing I would say to you, Mr. Zoll, I didn't know any of this. I didn't learn this until a week ago. In Massachusetts, and I've had to disclose on many things, both in my private life and my professional life. If it has the appearance, disclose it. It just does. And I know this is your first year here on the board. If you are taking the time to call the Ethics Commission to get a question, disclose it. I can tell you from experience, good and bad, it'll only make your life a lot easier going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have.
All right,
Just a quick response. Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Wells. Just two quick clarifications. So. I called the Ethics Commission after somebody was invited to come before the planning board to make this accusation. So after that happened is when I talked. It honestly had never crossed my mind. I think of that house as my ex-wife's house, and not mine. But perhaps I should have disclosed it. At any rate, I didn't. People know about it now. If you think if you think I voted anyway, and I know that you don't, Mr. Wells, and I hope that Ms. Musto thinks that too. If you think that I voted because I was stood to make some sort of money, I mean, I think we've heard a lot of mixed signals here about whether this is going to raise or decrease property values. So I think stating as a fact that that's stood to raise property values is questionable. But of course, I've never, ever acted that way in my life. And secondly, just to Ms. Musdo's point, you're right, I didn't want to send a letter. I didn't, because I didn't think we should be reclassified. The sign of compromise is when two opposing sides work together and find a solution that sometimes both sides aren't terribly happy with. That's what a compromise looks like a lot of times in politics. You got to learn to give a little bit. I gave in sending a letter. I gave by leaving the vast majority of that letter intact. I would argue that I made it stronger by changing the word review to provide a formal explanation for. I think if you think the word review means change, then we might have different words. We might have different definitions here, but that's what a compromise looks like. And if we're going to get to a place where we're compromising on this, we got to learn to give a little bit. I gave a lot in agreeing to put that together. And then when Mr. Zulus brought his letter forward, I said very specifically I was not going to make any edits to it because I didn't want to upset the apple cart. But I hope that you learn to give a little bit, because I've given a lot of folks have given a lot to try to compromise here, and we haven't gotten a lot back other than personal attacks. So I'm hoping we can kind of move beyond that and really get to a place where we can get back in compliance, restore the funding that this town desperately needs, both for its infrastructure as well as looking forward to the schools. We're in a tight spot here, and we have to work together. And using personal attacks, giving them oxygen, frankly, is not helpful. So I would ask that you move forward in the spirit of cooperation, because that is certainly the spirit that I'm moving forward in. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Musto.
Thank you. And I also agree in the spirit of moving forward. I'd really appreciate it if you wouldn't interrupt me when I speak and be a little bit more respectful. And as far as the letters go, we're moving forward from that we are going to disagree on that, because I think that's how we could have been in maybe a different situation going forward. We are where we are now, and let's move forward. Thank you.
All right, anything else on item 16? Mr. Zoll.
Just one final. We're not here because of me, okay? We're not here because of me. I think it's hilarious that people are making that point, but the idea that we had to have an election because I'm here on the select board is not true. That's all. That's all.
Oh, Ms. Musto.
I feel I must respond to that, because that has nothing to do with my comment. So I hope that was not aimed at me. That is not what I said at all. And so I think that's disappointing to me if you're aiming that comment at me. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Musto. Anything further?
Nothing from you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Bradley. All right, that's item 16. Moving on to item 4, discussion approval appointment of Thomas McCarthy as Director of Consolidated Facilities. I'm sure that's the reason we have cameras here tonight, because that is big news in our town. Mr. Milano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. McCarthy's in the back of the room. Why don't you come up, Tom?
Come on up, Tom.
They are looking at you. We're here because Chris Hayden, our facilities director, has given the town his notice. He intends to leave his position on April 5th. Sad to see Chris go. Thank him for his efforts. Chris and his family still live in town, so we know where to find him if we need him. And we hope he'll stay involved in town government. I'm here to present the appointment of Tom McCarthy to take over as the Director of Consolidated Facilities. Tom's been a Milton employee, Assistant Director of Public Works since 2016, has worked his career in Public Works and Public Service, previously with the towns of Norwood and North Attleboro. Exceeds in project management, personnel management, managing his crews, and we look forward to him taking over from facilities moving forward. Transition is kind of already in place. Tom and Chris have been spending some time together. Tom and Superintendent Burrows and I had a meeting today, and we'll continue to work towards that transition over the coming weeks. So happy to take any questions for myself.
Comments or
Tom.
questions from the members?
I should, add that Tom is also lifelong, or not lifelong, but many year.
22 years.
22 year Milton resident as well.
So I would just like
Ms.
to
Bradley.
say, thank you. I would just like to say that I have heard nothing but great things about Tom, and so I am very excited for this appointment, and I thank you for stepping up in the town to make our consolidated facilities run smoothly, so thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Ms. Musto.
Thank you. I just also want to say thank you to Mr. McCarthy. He's done a fabulous job as the Assistant DPW Director, and I think he will make a great choice for this job, so thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to refer to Mr. McCarthy tonight as Tom. We've collaborated on many endeavors together over the years, and Ms. Milano knows very well how I feel about this. And Tom's been a great asset to this community, and we are very lucky that he'll be moving to this role. And, congratulations, my friend. Best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Mr. Zoll.
I wish I could add to the accolades, Mr. Chair, for Mr. McCarthy. Your CV looks great. I know that you've done a lot of great work for this town. In absence of having a great personal story, I would like to make a motion, Mr. Chair, that we appoint Thomas McCarthy as the Director of Consolidated Facilities.
I'll second.
Motion been made and seconded. In terms of further discussion, the town of Milton is lucky to have Tom McCarthy staying on and taking over as Director of Consolidated Facilities, and we're looking forward to working together with Tom going forward. So other comments or questions? This will be a roll call vote because we have a hybrid member. All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulis, yes. Congratulations, Tom, and glad you're going to be here.
Appreciate it.
All right, thank you for that. Item 5 is discussion approval of MBTA Communities Act status and issues, and then there's a subpart item A. So the first part, item 5, there was some discussion in item 16 on this, so if there is anything that any of the members want to raise prior to our request, our item 5A, if there's anything that any of the members want to add on the MBTA Communities Act status and issues. Mr. Zoll.
Yeah, I might just add a couple of thoughts on this, Mr. Chair, and I'll try to keep it short because I'm aware that we spoke about this already at length. I don't think anyone on this board is going to try to take away the voice of folks who voted for or against Issue 1, Article 1 in the special town meeting. I think it's important that we acknowledge what the election was for. It was for a zoning overlay to be compliant with the MBTA Communities Act. The voters rejected the overlay, and so now we're back to the beginning of where do we go from here. The state is obviously, we're not going to talk about legal action right now, but I think it's important to acknowledge that what the voters said and didn't say. They didn't say anything about reclassification. They didn't say anything about the act itself. Now, certainly people may have said things like that on the side, or they may have had some of those thoughts. There was certainly a lot of mis and disinformation that was flying around about the vote. And so it's difficult to say, or to put into words exactly what this vote means, other than it was a rejection of that particular zoning overlay. So it's my opinion that the planning board now needs to create a zoning plan that is compliant so that we can be back into the compliant status. We can restore funding to this town. And as a select board member, I stand ready, willing, and able to do whatever I can do to assist the planning board in that work. They have already done a lot of significant work in looking at zoning possibilities, and we've heard from multiple members that putting something like this together should be easy. We were assured of that during the campaign. So I look forward to seeing the quick work of the planning board so that we can be back into compliant status with a zoning plan, if I'm sure is approved by the planning board and the select board, will meet widespread approval within this town.
Other comments or questions? Okay. Ms. Bradley. And then Mr. Wells.
Sorry, Richard, do you want to go first? I'm Mr. Wells, sorry. Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I just wanted to say that by now, everybody who's a nerd like me has read the Attorney General's case against us. And one of the things that she puts in there is, as a request, is that we hold a special meeting within 3 months. Whether or not, whatever the outcome is of this judgment, I am formally right now asking the select board to start thinking about holding a special meeting within 4 months of this. I'm going to give everybody a month, let's say 6 weeks, but I would really like us to start to think about what the future holds. And I don't want us to be waiting here until December of this year to finally do something. I think there has to be a timeline. I think if we don't, I mean, let me just say this. I was raised on a newspaper. I had to meet deadlines every night, 3 times a night, when there were still newspapers who had 3 editions. We have no deadline right now. We have no deadline because we've blown our deadline. So I would just like to say that what the Attorney General put in is important. Her request of the 3 months does not seem like it's overburdening to anybody. And I would like for us as a select board to think about what it is that we're going to say is the end stop of this. So judgment comes down 2 months from now. Judgment is that we have to be at some place in 3 months. What have we done in those first 2 months before the judgment came down, right? So I guess maybe it's just me, but I always look at, when do I have to do something? This is what I teach my kids, right? When do you have to do something? How can we break it down? How much work do you have to do? And how many weeks do we have to do it in? I just think that we have to accomplish something. And right now, the last planning board meeting I watched, they are not accomplishing, they do not have a goal of accomplishing things. There is no deadline. There is no benchmarks that they should be doing week by week by week. To me, I think that we have a responsibility to the town to prepare to present something. It's not an indefinite, we just get to not be in compliance. We have to be in compliance. We are breaking the law. I don't know how else to look at that, but we're breaking the law right now. So for me, I'm hoping that the select board, maybe not tonight, Mr. Chair, but maybe shortly in the future, we can come up with an actual timeline of what is expected of the planning board. I know we don't have oversight on them, but like, you know, can you give us some benchmarks? Because I haven't gotten any of those yet either. Some suggestions of what that should look like. And then have an actual date where we have to say, okay, here we go, everybody, this is it. This is our last time. So for me, that part of her, the case that was filed today really struck a chord with me. So, sorry guys. So I just wanted to say that, and I really think that there's a lot in there that we cannot discuss here because it is, you know, a lawsuit and we have to do this with an executive session. But I think that that's a public piece that we can talk about. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are a lot of things I could say about this tonight, but I'm going to just hold a little bit. I do want to say I'm very disappointed in the Attorney General, especially in light of the fact that our state representatives have been conversing directly with that office regularly. She was aware that, and from our town council as well, that we were meeting last night and tonight, and she knew that we might have something to report tomorrow after tonight, and yet she opted to not only file, but then to hold a press conference on the radio today, which to me is a little bit dirty. So there's 2 issues here. I've been for reclassification all along. I continue to feel that way. I've advocated publicly and to the planning board that I think that they do know this now, that they should at least be working towards 10% compliance as an adjacent community to have that done, so it shows that they're doing something. But it's not our role; it's their role, and I'm only here, like as Mr. Zoll said, to support them. The second aspect of this is the guidelines themselves, and I don't want to speak at night, but I've felt the more that I've researched this, the more that I've talked to multiple attorneys, the more I'm actually out in Springfield working in the city of Springfield, and not an MBTA community, but I've talked a little bit out here, and you know, we're going to find out. We are not alone in this fight. There are other communities looking at this, and one of the things that I would say to the governor, who is my friend, who I support, and I know she inherited this from Governor Baker, but Governor Baker, when he wrote this was an opt-in, opt-out. That was the intention of Baker. Now it's become this, you know, one size fits all. In this, the communities of this state are not made up of this. As Mr. Zoll says, if we have a housing issue in the state, So why not look at the entire state, not just the communities around the MBTA? As Mr. Zoll said, and he was 100% right, 5 years ago, the T didn't want to get rid of this. They don't care about it. They won't even show our state reps the plan for the upgrades. And it is highly possible that there will be no stations in Milton other than Central and Milton Station, which only has 20-something parking spaces. So the final thing I do want to say in this is the voters of this town have spoken. And they spoke very loudly, and both sides spoke. But I intend to honor that vote and fight for that vote. And I don't view it as we're breaking the law. Heck, if we didn't throw tea over a boat of the Boston Tea Party, we might not be in the United States of America today. And if some brave men didn't stand on the Concord Bridge, who knows what would have happened. But that's where I'm at on this. I do hope that they will at least work towards that, get us moving in a positive direction. And then as far as we have to take our case, I'm prepared to fight if we have to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Ms. Musto, and then Ms. Bradley. Go ahead, Ms. Musto. She's Ms. Bradley's already spoken.
Okay, thank you. I think Mr. Wells raised a lot of really great points, and I think that, the planning board, I believe, is committed to doing something. Don't forget we have a short deadline as well for our warrants. And so that is constricting us a little bit too. But we have to honor the vote that was just taken at town meeting. That was taken with the public. And overwhelmingly, people voted no. And I think that we have to honor that and do our best that we can for the community. We have to let the planning board do their thing. That's a separate elected board. And it's important that they get to do their job. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Musto. Ms. Bradley.
Thank you so much. So there's two things that I would like to address. I believe that our ballot was up online and people could read it, and because it's a public ballot, right?
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the actual, what we actually voted on was whether or not we approved Article 1. That's what we voted on. People do not like the way that we, the town, we put out the zoning laws. They didn't say anything about reclassification. They didn't say anything about where the district should be. They didn't say anything about that. And for anybody to say that we have a mandate to do all of those other things, that's not the case. The vote was for specifically whether or not you like Article 1. And whether or not I like Joe Biden, it's a yes or no. Whether or not I like Donald Trump, that's a yes or no. You can't put in anything else into those votes except for what I was asked. And by the way, that question, I really hope people go and look at that question. It was very confusing. It was not laid out in a way that people could actually understand what they were voting for. We have spent years working on this zoning article. To expect town members to learn it in, what was it, 5 weeks, 6 weeks? 5 weeks?
Roughly.
Okay, so to have them learn this in that amount of time is an extraordinary feat. They would have to devote literally all their weekends to learning about this because it's so intricate. So that's the first part I would like to address. The second part I want to address is that if you watch the planning board meeting, which took place last week on Thursday, they literally said that they cannot be prepared for May town meeting. They said that. And in fact, Jim, who's a member there, said that he's going to eat crow because he thought it could be met by May. They all said they could not meet our May town meeting with new zoning. That is a major thing. So already we're now in compliance, out of compliance by 5 months. My point is, we as a select board have to say, you have to be in compliance by X. Come up with something. Work on something. To date, there has been no work that the planning board has provided that has actually given us an alternative zoning proposal. And so for me, this evening, I really need us to make sure that we focus on what our job is, which is to be in compliance with the law and make that happen as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Musto, did you have Mr. Zoll?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just two quick things. First, I'm actually, and obviously I hadn't heard about this idea, but I am compelled about the idea of trying to set a date and a timeline for a special town meeting. I think that's a good idea. I think we should probably have a discussion with the planning board about what's realistic timeline, keeping in mind that expediency will be the key. But I think certainly they have done enough work up to this point where they should be able to make a tight deadline work. Admittedly, we're closing the warrant, and I don't think that they could make the May meeting. But I'm compelled by Ms. Bradley's point. Second, Mr. Chair, just to address quickly what Mr. Wells said, and I don't mean this in any sort of disrespectful way, but to the earlier conversation, I really don't know that it's helpful for us to use rhetoric around things like the Tea Party or the American Revolution when it comes to discussing a zoning ordinance. The Tea Party fight was about taxation without representation. The American Revolution was about taxation without representation, about having a distant government where we had no representation and where we had no ability to fight for our rights. This was a bill that was passed, including by our own locally elected representatives, almost unanimously in the House and Senate, signed by a Republican governor, passed by Democratic legislation, all folks from Massachusetts, overwhelmingly, to address a local issue. So just in the interest, and again, I know that we're going to hear from them soon. I can't be soon enough, in my opinion, from a group of citizens that are interested in lowering the temperature on this rhetoric. Yeah. I would just encourage us to refrain from, we got an email, all of us got an email from a gentleman who was encouraging Milton to secede from Massachusetts. I mean, we can joke about that, but that's the level of rhetoric that's going on right now. And I really don't believe that it's helpful or allows for us to have a good, calm conversation about what we're actually doing here. And again, Mr. Wells, I don't mean that in any sort of disrespectful way. Massachusetts is the birthplace of American democracy. Town meeting is the sort of foundation of American democracy. And we have that here in this town. And to suggest that we need some sort of a revolution, I just worry about the tones there. And I'm again not implying that Mr. Wells was suggesting that. I just would like us to try to avoid using those kinds of metaphors in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please, Mr. Wells has his hand up.
He does, but I don't want to overstep. Okay, Mr. Wells. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize for the. I know I used a dramatic. I guess I used a dramatic example there, but it doesn't delineate from. Look at. If you don't feel, and you may not because you were a proponent of this, I tried for a long time to just kind of stand in the middle and look both ways. And a couple of things really changed my mind about this. And to your point about the vote, both Senator Timilty and Representative Driscoll have stated publicly now that what they voted for was the law, and that neither of them would have voted for the guidelines as they exist today. Both of them said that. So, so even though it passed, you're correct in the numbers, but it was not on the guidelines, and you can see the pushback. But if you don't feel that we're being bullied a little bit in this, then you're not paying attention. Because I've read emails, I've seen presentations. Since when does a lieutenant governor come to a fundraiser on a local issue in a town? Since when does a governor and a lieutenant governor send an email from their PAC fund, their campaign PAC fund, to vote yes on a local issue? I've been involved in many bullying cases in my life, and I hate to say it, and it saddens me to have to say this, but I feel like we're being bullied. I feel like that this is just such a big issue. When a Boston Globe reporter says, "Get ready, Milton, they're coming," like they're trying to put us in a headlock and squeeze us until we say uncle. And to be honest, Ben, you don't really know me. You haven't known me that long. I just don't kowtow to things like that, even when it's someone politically that I've supported in the past. So that's why I'm where I'm at right now in this. Even as recently as what the Attorney General did today. Come on. You heard, I know it's executive session, but you heard our counsel's presentation last night on how he felt the dialogue was between him and the Attorney General's office. Did we do that today? No. All right, that's my comment. I don't want to get on my hands.
Yeah, I just want to remind the members, anything that's said in the executive session has to stay in executive session. So let's just.
I didn't say it, but
No,
I just wanted to indicate it just to remind him without saying what.
I understand, Richard. We just want to be very careful about what is said in executive session. Other comments or questions?
Can I just a quick response?
Go ahead, yeah.
Mr. Wells, I don't think anybody here has stood up and cheered for what the Attorney General has done. I think some of us, including me, said that this is exactly what would happen if we voted no, and the state sort of promised that this was what was going to happen, and it's happened. So I think, as Ms. Bradley said, it's disappointing. It's not surprising in the least bit, because I was accused of fear-mongering when I said that this is what was going to happen, and said that was speculation, that surely this wouldn't happen. And it's happened, and it doesn't mean that I'm happy about it, or it doesn't mean that I feel like this is that was the right approach by the state by any stretch of the imagination. So I just want to make sure that my sentiments about that are clear. Thank you.
The comments, Ms. Musto.
Thank you. It's concerning to me that this democratic process of a town-wide vote, that the Attorney General would not respect that. I think that's very concerning. That's democracy. People vote. And again, I would hope that she would come and work with us instead of going to this tactic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Musto. Other comments or questions? So I have 4 suggested paths forward for consideration by the members. 1, reclassification. I mentioned this initially. One of the areas where we, on this board and with the planning board, had consensus last fall and had unanimity last fall was in the materials that I prepared to seek to argue for reclassification with the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. It was unanimously supported here. The planning board chair thought it was excellent, and I believe it was hailed by other members of the planning board. I think those efforts should continue. That's number 1. Number 2, alternatives to Granite Avenue. Last fall, after I met with the Cortlandt Circle neighbors, I asked the planning department and the consultants to try to come up with alternatives to Granite Avenue. There was one alternative that was developed. It was not acceptable to the neighbors, but I think the efforts to continue, I think the efforts to find alternatives to Granite Avenue should continue. Third, there are a lot of talented people in this community, talented people who have served on the planning board and talented people who have served on the select board. I think we should use that talent to try to help us find consensus in our community. Now, that would be subject to our friends on the planning board agreeing, because this is a planning board issue, but I think it would be helpful to try to find consensus on how to move forward to bring together former planning board members and former select board members who come from all parts of town and all areas of town to try to help us find some consensus on this issue. Fourth, grant funding. The complaint that was filed by the Attorney General's office today, as Ms. Bradley alluded to, requests in one of the prayers for relief that the town create a zoning district within 3 months after the entry of an injunction. And I recognize that the Attorney General and the Governor's administration are separate constitutional offices. However, they both represent the state. And it seems to me consistency from the state dictates that there should be no withholding of grant funding until 3 months after the entry of an injunction, if an injunction is to issue. So I think we should make that point to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities and to the administration in writing, that it would be consistent, that there would be no withholding of grant funding until 3 months after a decision by the court in this matter. And I would certainly be willing to put together a writing to that effect to see if that's something that we could move forward on. So those are my thoughts. Not necessarily, we don't have to respond at this point. We can think about them going forward. But Mr. Zoll has something to say.
Just a quick point, Mr. Chair. I'm supportive of all 4 of those. As I've said earlier tonight and repeatedly, I believe that we're classified correctly. But I think it would be helpful to have a final answer to the classification status, and I will not stand in the way of seeking such a status. I also agree in the need to find alternatives to Granite Avenue. I love the idea of having an East Milton Advisory Committee, and I wholeheartedly agree that there should be no withholding until we've got some real clarity on this. So thank you for putting those thoughts together so concisely and quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Zoll. Other comment? Ms. Bradley.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I think it's a lot to ask for the state, honestly, given the fact that they said that these would be your repercussions. I don't know. Maybe I'm being a parent right now. So when I say these are your consequences if you don't do X, those are their consequences. So for me, I'm with you on the 1, the 2, the 3, but the waiting on 3 months, to me, it's almost like you're saying, wait and see what the judge says. And if the judge says X, then okay. But they already have something in the law that they can start doing right now. It doesn't need a judge, Mr. Chair. It doesn't need any decision. It actually just needs to be within the law that they already have, which is discretionary judgment over grants. What you're saying is, please wait 3 months, 6 months, 4 months, until we have a decision on whether or not we're a rapid transit community. But then does it start right then? Do they put everything on hold and then they start then? Or do we wait and see if we can actually come up with a new type of zoning law, which, by the way, again, we have not seen from our planning board. We have seen 0 proposals that have been given to us from the planning board to be in compliance with state law. So for me, everybody knew these consequences. When my kids do not do something, they know the consequences. We are acting like we should be above the law of what has already been presented. And for me, I just have a real hard line on this. How are we showing our children that it's okay to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to follow this, even though I knew this was the consequences? Like, you guys want to be mad about other things? I get that. But they have every right to do what they are doing currently. They have every right to take away every single discretionary grant that they have put forth. And so for me, I am not going to sit here and say, yes, I agree with you that they should wait. No. They can do whatever they want, because you know what? They are the state, and we, the town of Milton, have to actually comply with state laws. Just learned it. I know this is the truth. So I don't understand. I'm in law school, y'all. So I don't understand why this is an okay thing. You want to ask them to postpone their judgment until we see that? Fine. But do not ask them to put their judgments on pause, because they have every right to do what they want to do until, tomorrow. Like tomorrow they can come down and take away everything that we've ever gotten. The governor can veto every single line item that any one of our delegates put forth. She has the right to do that. These are all things that the town has not recognized as a punishment, because it is a punishment, because they tried with carrots. They gave us $80,000 to try and make this work. They gave us 2 years plus to try and make this work. The carrots were all there along the way, and now they're like, hey, I got a stick, and here's the stick, and I'm going to use it, and I don't blame them. So I got you on 1, 2, 3. Number 4, I'm having some issues with, because I don't think we have a right to ask the state that.
Ms. Bradley. Ms. Musto.
Sure. Ms. Bradley, do you work for the state, or do we work for the residents in this town? We work for the residents in this town.
No, that's a rhetorical question.
It's a rhetorical question.
Let's just let Ms. Musto
we work for the residents in this town. and when I'm not going to go into guidelines and regs because that's a whole other thing. And I think part of what you're talking about, Mr. Chair, should actually probably be discussed in executive session with regards to some of that, I believe, because when you're talking about these funds, there's the 4 that were identified. And there were the others discretionary funds.
Let me just be clear. I'm
Yeah.
talking about things outside of litigation. These would be things outside of litigation. The final one that I suggested was is consistency between what the Attorney General has filed and what the Governor's office and the administration intend to do. And if the Attorney General's view is that that the town should have 3 months after an injunction, should an injunction issue, then grant funding perhaps. Could be the withholding of grant funding could be postponed until that time as well. So I'm not suggesting anything with respect to litigation. Those 4 points are outside of litigation. The only connector being the position of the Attorney General's office with respect to timing. I think that should be consistent with they don't have an obligation to.
Right.
They don't have an obligation to, but they both represent the Commonwealth. And it seems to me consistency from the Commonwealth dictates if we have 3 months after an injunction on this, then perhaps the grant funding withholding should not begin until that same time period. So.
Okay. I was really happy to hear you talk about the reclassification. I think that is very important. And I think we should pursue that. I think as far as the planning board, they're independent, they're the planning board. What I heard from one of their last meetings is that they are going to work on something. So I think we let them do their job, and we encourage them to do their job. Okay, so I certainly think that. I think we have to be supportive of other boards, and so I think that's very important. As far as some of the other things that you spoke about with alternatives to Granite Ave, again, we don't know yet what will be on the plan. So I think it's almost premature to do something with that quite yet. And as far as gathering people together, I mean, we have lots of outside people that could help on all different aspects. So, I'm always open to suggestions from anybody in the community. I don't think it should be limited. I think anyone who has something to offer should go to a planning board meeting and offer their suggestions. And I think the difference I see between the planning board meetings and our meetings are we have a limited amount of time. We give people 3 minutes, 21 minutes total. From what I've seen of the planning board, they have more time for people to speak. And there's also people can write in suggestions as well. And perhaps they'll have more forums, as they're working this out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Musso.
One more thing.
Can we go to Richard first? Because
please
he had
go
his hand.
Richard. Yes.
Mr. Wells.
So, Mr. Chair, thank you. I'm just going to reiterate, we represent the people of this town. And I'm going to fight, as I have for my whole life, for those residents. And given that, Mr. Chair, it's already 8:15. We have people's business that we have to get onto tonight. And we could debate this issue all night long. We're in where we're at. I'm anxious to hear from town council when we get into executive session tonight. And then I just ask, can we move forward on our agenda? We have a lot to cover here tonight.
Well, let's let Ms. Bradley speak, and then
So
Mr.
very
Zoll, and we'll move it along. I promise, Mr. Wells. But the people have been the people at this table and yourself have been elected to speak on behalf of the residents, and so we have to speak on behalf of the residents. Ms. Bradley.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. As people spoke at length last night in executive session, I believe that now in public session, people should be allowed to speak as well. I just very quickly wanted to touch upon who I represent. I represent the people of Milton. But when I did that, I took an oath to follow the laws of the Commonwealth, the laws of the Constitution, and the laws of the town of Milton. Those are the 3 things that I took an oath to do. So while I represent the residents of Milton, I can't, in all due conscience, represent them to say we should break a law. And I honestly, you may not agree with the law. There's a lot of laws I don't agree with. Trust me, I do not agree with a lot of laws. But I do not know how anybody on this board or any elected official can ask me to actually go forward and not follow the laws of the Commonwealth and the laws of the U.S. government. We follow the laws of the town. We had an election. The election was on one specific thing. I'm going to work on that one specific thing, which is they don't like that zoning, period. That's what they voted on. I will represent that till the cows come home. But I will not take a stance that we should violate any law in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, because I stood there in front of my children and swore that I would do that. And so for me, it is not just about representing the people of Milton. It is about representing the people of Milton in the larger community of our state, in the larger community of our country, because those are the laws that I had to say that I would follow. So for me, that's where I stand, and I am going to do that to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. Mr. Zoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just that was very heartfelt, and I applaud you for that, Ms. Bradley. No, it was very heartfelt, and I applaud you for it. I just wanted just a quick note on the reclassification. I had said that I would, not get in the way of arguing for reclassification. The reason that I am not in favor of reclassification is not because I particularly love the classification system or anything else, although I really do love our trolley. The reason that I'm against pursuing it is because I feel like it's a bit of a fool's errand. I think that the legal definitions have been clear. I've been persuaded by the study of the law and the definitions and multiple maps of the MBTA community dating back to the 1930s that classify us as a rapid transit community. So I just think that it's a poor use of resources and time, but if it's something that the town wants to do, I'm not going to get in the way. However, I think it would be a good faith effort for the planning board not to just be planning for 10%, but also to be planning for 25%, because we cannot assume that we're going to be reclassified. And if the planning board is only working on a 10% model and they're not working on a 25% model, I don't think that demonstrates good faith to the state that we're taking our responsibilities seriously. So I would, and I appreciate that we do not oversee the planning board or have any ability to compel them to do any particular work, but I would strongly encourage them, while they're developing their 10% plan, to develop an alternative 25% plan that is significantly different enough so that we can bring it forward to town meeting and vote on it. Finally, I would like to also challenge the state to show in its good faith that it takes the Mattapan high-speed line seriously and start redoubling its efforts to refurbish that line. We've been promised green line card quality cars on that, and we don't seem to be any closer than we were since I moved to this town a dozen years ago to having a real good trolley system. Now, the trolley has been radically, I think, maligned by some folks. It doesn't just sit 38 people. Anybody that's ridden it at a rush hour can tell you that it fits a whole lot more people than that. But just because we have a bit of an antiquated system, it doesn't absolve us of our responsibility, but it also doesn't absolve the state of its responsibility to take care of the residents, many of whom, not overwhelmingly, but many of whom are from Mattapan, that ride that trolley, to have a good functional trolley that connects us to the red line, and frankly, a good functional red line. So while we're working in good faith, I hope that the state expends the same amount of energy working on the MBTA as it is at working at the enforcement of the MBTA Communities Act. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other comments or questions? And I understand, Ms. Bradley, you're not interested as much right now in the idea, but is there a consensus that I can try to put together something to seek a postponement of the withholding of grant funding for the board to consider? Is there a consensus on that?
That's for me.
I'm in support of postponement.
All right.
But, Mr. Chair.
Richard has his hand up too.
Mr. Wells, and then Ms. Bradley?
Yeah.
Mr. Wells?
Mr. Chair, I'd just rather wait. I'm not saying yes or no. I'd like to see what town council thinks about this when we get to it.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, I thought that you were thinking about this in a different way, not as a...
Nothing to do with litigation.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Nothing to do with litigation.
I think that this is more of a select board piece. of what we want to do?
That's the intention.
Okay, thank you. So, while I believe that they have every right to do what they are doing, I will firmly support us trying to fight back and get our money back, because as the chair of the Finance Committee, I can tell you it's not looking good.
So I would
yes.
take that as a consensus to try to put something together
Please
for the
do.
board
Please
to
do.
consider.
Please do.
All right. Anything else on item 5? Now it's time for some healing. Item 5A. Prior to the election, some residents reached out with a desire to seek to try to heal and bring together the community. And they are here with us tonight, and with their thoughts, presentation, and ideas on how to bring together the community going forward. I hope I haven't mischaracterized that in any way, but please introduce yourselves, and we are your audience.
Before we introduce ourselves, we want to clarify we are not the East Milton Advisory Committee. Just want to make that clear.
No, I think that what was on the agenda was the creation of, I think that was
Okay.
the thought, the creation of, and it may be a misnomer, and please correct that. Please correct that as
Do you want copies of our?
I think we have copies, and maybe we can put it up on the big board too.
Okay. So I'm Kristen Bagley-Jones. I live at 88 Pleasant Street.
And if I could just, if you could, each of you speak into the microphone, and I apologize. We
while.
only have one, unless someone comes from the back and has another microphone. Just, pardon me, do your best.
Sure. Sorry about that. Kristen Bagley-Jones, 88 Pleasant Street.
Rachel Shuey, 53 Center Lane.
Amy Flanagan, 36 Wood Street. Bridget Conroy, 44 Antwerp Street.
Okay, so I'm going to start us off with just a couple of comments. We decided our name was moving forward as one town. We think it's really important that that's something that we all try to join together and do. Thank you for having us here tonight. We did want to try to get here before the vote, but we weren't able to, and that's okay. We know there's been many hours put into this. We know there's been many experts. We are not experts. We did not put the hours in that you all have, the planning board, the select, all of you, town meeting members. We have not done that. We'll be very honest about that. But we do, and we know a lot of really good work went into this. But the plan didn't pass. So we're coming to you to say, what can we do to move us forward? Next slide. Who are we and why are we here? Some of us voted no. Some of us voted yes. There are people on both sides of this that we all know, love, and respect. We live in different parts of town, the four of us. Some of us are town meeting members, some of us were town meeting members, and some of us plan to be town meeting members. We don't all agree with each other on everything, the four of us, but we are very concerned, as you all are, about the divide that we've witnessed happening in Milton. We don't pretend to be experts in zoning. We really don't. We're not here to tell you what to do. We have no idea. Nor do we think we have any answers. However, we are deeply worried about the great divide happening in this town, and we're here to ask you today to help us find a way forward. Amy?
Next slide. Hi, and I think even before I get to this, we're moving forward as one town, and it's not all about like kumbaya. We really want to move forward. Like, this is about action as well as coming together. We don't see action without coming together, honestly. So we're here today to ask you to consider these questions. Assuming that we are going to work towards compliancy, how do we get there in a way that brings the town together and makes us whole again? So not just how do we become whole again, but also how do we get there? And also, how can we best share factual information across town in an easily accessible manner? Just sitting in this room, there were so many times I heard things come up about we need information, we need factual information. People on both sides still have questions. This is a really complicated thing to unpack. We found that people really want information. And so how do we get that out? Next slide. So knowing that a lot has been done already, we're like, how do we move forward? So we thought about it. We had these guidelines that were the skeleton, right, of this question one, plan one, whatever it was called. How do we move forward and make a significant plan that brings the town together? Let's go back to the guidelines on which these zoning decisions were made. To us, looking at those guidelines is the way to move forward. So the guidelines were preserve the physical character of the town to the greatest extent possible. 2, reach but do not exceed the requirements in statute and compliance guidelines. 3, draft zoning which disincentivizes teardowns to the greatest extent possible. 4, take advantage of existing multifamily housing. 5, avoid rezoning historic districts and parcels with historic structures. 6, zone larger non-residential parcels to prevent displacement and minimize neighborhood impact. And 7, site districts in transit and amenity-rich areas to the greatest extent possible. So if you go to the next slide, we look at those guidelines and we say, what was the process for creating these guidelines? Where did they come from? Are they still all relevant moving forward? I think we've all learned a lot in the last few months. We've all have more questions from the last few months. Which ones were born from the state's requirements? That was a big question people asked. And what is the most efficient way to gather residents' ideas on these guidelines? Next slide. So when we were talking to the people, some of the examples of what would come out of guideline expiration, like these are some of the things we heard. This is just the beginning. Who's defining the physical character of the town? Residents have different opinions on what the character of this town is. Another one that came up was, if a guideline prevents creating equity, is that guideline negotiable? Because we did hear equity was challenged because of the guidelines. So do we look at that? The next one, when zoning for larger non-residential parcels to minimize neighborhood impacts, how is that impact measured? That was something that was completely left out of that guideline or, what we heard. And then we also heard, does the zoning have to be in amenity-rich areas, or can the amenities grow out of the new zoning? So just something to think about. Next slide, please. Based on these conversations, we also heard about where are the guidelines that talk about affordable housing, working towards meeting our 40B requirements, sustainability, seeking flexibility from the state, maybe in the density or the continuous land requirements. Like, can we look for flexibility in other places from the state? Next slide.
So back to me. We're asking you, our elected officials, the select board, working with the planning board and your town staff, who've done an incredible job, by the way, to appoint an advisory committee to be made up of residents who want to move towards compliance in our zoning plan. We're not talking about reclassification. We're not here for that. We are talking about how do you work towards a compliant zoning plan. Second, we believe that, and this is an important one, I think, any means to lower the temperature of the community dialogue is crucial, that we all engage. And we saw it here tonight. We see it on the planning board. We're also asking our elected officials to work together. But any way that we can all assist in lowering the temperature of the community dialogue, it's been pretty bad out there, and we need to all make a commitment. If our kids acted this way, we would tell them it was unacceptable. And then the third point is the clear and factual information. You all have done a ton of work. I have not done that kind of work. When I went to educate myself about this, there was a lot that you had to look through, and I'm going to be honest, a lot of it didn't make any sense to me. But I kept looking, and then I started to talk to more people, and I got to understand it a little bit more. But it was not easily accessible. We even asked you, Mike, if Mr. Zulus, if we could change. You can call me Mike,
Kristen. We go way back.
We go way back. We even asked if we could get some clarification on what the vote actually meant, because it was so confusing. But it was too late for that point. I understand why we couldn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this.
Yes.
And just to add, just for anyone who doesn't know, so our charter requires that the vote in the referendum be the exact vote that was the vote at town meeting. And the town meeting vote was going to be to approve Article 1, et cetera, et cetera. But there was a typo in the article. And so at the time, when the time came to make the motion, I talked to the town moderator and town council and said, well, how do you want to handle this? Should I just offer the motion, which would have been a lot shorter, and do an amendment, offer an amendment after that? Or should I just include it all in the motion? And not thinking anything about a possible referendum, the town moderator and the town council suggested, just put it all in the motion. So I put it all in the motion, which was understandable to town meeting, but didn't, because of our charter, didn't really make for a very accessible ballot question. So
And that's no fault of anyone.
Something to be learned going forward, that we may always have a ballot question going forward.
Exactly. Okay. Next thought. So some potential tasks of this advisory committee might be the committee could create a way to discuss and brainstorm the guiding principles, the 7 guiding principles that Amy talked about for any new plan going forward, and in a way that everybody can be heard, because clearly many conversations have happened where not everyone has felt heard. And that just isn't going to move us forward if people don't feel heard. We know there was a survey. We looked at the survey. All of us were concerned about this, and I have to say none of us saw the survey. None of us completed the survey, not through anyone's fault. But we think it's time to create a new one that's very brief and talks about the guiding principles. Direct people to say, what do you think is the most important thing to be in this law, in this zoning plan? We know, and the third thing is, we know that there is, as I said earlier, a lot of information out there, but could we work with town staff to create 1 page or 2 pages of frequently asked questions on the town website that is in clear layman's terms to give updates as we go along in one place? Let's see. Oh, no, wait a minute. Sorry, got a little distracted by my own writing. We think the committee should represent all areas of town. We think it should go across geographic. We think it should go across all sorts of different people. We think the committee should be small. We would ask that the committee move quickly, because we understand there's a timeline, and even if there wasn't a timeline, we got to get going on this stuff, and we got to get people together on it. So we just want to be part of. We're happy to help in any way we can. We are not saying we are the committee. We are not saying, please appoint us. We are saying we will, because we opened our mouths, we will roll up our sleeves and we will get to work. But we're not assuming that we are the committee. But we want to move towards how do we get to compliance and how do we bring the town together. We're glad to hear that there's a commitment to the deadline, but we hope we can take some of that time to work in a very thoughtful way for everyone to be heard, listened to, and get our town back together again in the way that it used to be, so that we can all feel heard and we can all feel listened to. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now. But that's what we're here for, is to ask you to help us make this happen, because you're the select board.
And I just want to add that we're not trying to slow this down. We see this as moving quickly. But if we move forward and we don't get to a yes, then we've wasted more time. So it's like, let's invest a little bit of time now and get to where we need to go.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for presenting these very helpful ideas. Comments or questions from the members?
I mean, I have thoughts, but Ms. Musto wants
Mr.
to go
Zoll.
first.
Mr. Zoll.
Well, first, I want to do a full disclosure that Ms. Shuey's daughter and my daughter played soccer together for many years. And my comments will not reflect any of the time that we spent together on many cold sidelines in many, many towns across Massachusetts. Thank you, all 4 of you, for stepping up and trying to initiate this dialogue, because I think it's a super critically important one. It was around the election. I'll just tell a very quick story, which I think is funny and hopefully will merit the time spent on it. I was holding a sign in East Milton Square for the Yes campaign. We had people that were holding yes signs and no signs. And I was standing next to a fantastic woman who was holding a no sign, and she overheard me mention my 4 kids, and her eyes got big, and she kind of looked at me, and I was like, oh yeah, I got 4 kids, and so we started talking, and she's got kids at Collicott, and we were raving about the principal there, who was fantastic, and anyways, we just kind of got lost in conversation, and a guy had pulled up to the stoplight and looked over at us. He rolled his windows down. He's like, you guys aren't supposed to be talking to each other. It's like, you're confusing my kids in the back seat. The kids did look a little confused that here's a guy with a yes sign and a woman with a no sign having a nice dialogue. I know that we have this in our DNA to make this work. I know that we have this as a town. I know that we can do this. And I applaud you for bringing this concept forward. I think these are some really important questions that you've asked here. And I know that Tim and many others, Josh and Nick too, there was a lot of thought that tried to go into how do we explain really complicated zoning laws to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. And it's very difficult to do that. And I think that you are absolutely right to call us to say we need to continue to do this and continue to work with folks. So, Mr. Chair, I'm very supportive of this concept. I would be happy to help be involved in it, and to the extent that people want me involved in it, I'd be happy to help support this initiative. As much for restoring the tone that we need to have in this town for our kids, for everybody, for their to feel welcome and loved and understood in their own town. It's not a high bar, but somehow we haven't been able to clear it lately, and I feel like we can do that, and I really appreciate you guys coming forward with this.
Mr. Zoll, other comments or questions?
Mine's just
Ms. Bradley.
Geez Louise, mine's just to disclose that I believe that, Rachel, you're also the mom who handles all of our track and field stuff. And so my kid's on track and field, and he's new, he's a freshman, and we don't have the same last names, but I just want to put that out there that I'm going to disclose this, okay? So I'm going to echo a little bit about what Mr. Zoll said. And when I pick up the kids so we're freshmen. So, not me. I'm not a freshman. But when I pick up the kids from school, I'm either on a call or talking about a call or handling something, and they always say, is this a yes or no? Like, is it yes or no? Like, what's happening? And the kids only see this as a yes and a no. Mm-hmm. They don't have any concept of what the yes and the no is. They just know that there's some on the yes and there's some on the no. And I think that this divide has been happening for quite some time. I think it started during the pandemic, and I think that it has only deepened since then. So I applaud y'all for even coming forward to say, this is something we should tackle. I'm not going to volunteer to be on it because I'm a little bit busy, but I think that there should definitely be members of the select board on it, and members of the planning board. Yes. I think that this is part of it, and I think there has to be people from all sides and from all precincts that can actually, and not just all precincts, like strong members in those precincts, so that we can really start, bridging this, because there's been a lot of crazy things that have been lobbed at everybody over the last year. 2 years, and it's time that we stop that and just start realizing we gotta be neighbors again. So I applaud you all for coming forward. Again, I know Rachel only through her emails, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. Mr. Wells. Oh, you're on mute, Richard.
It's been a long day, Mr. Chair. So thank you. I just, my one suggestion is I don't like getting out of our lane. I would ask them before them if they would consider bringing this to the planning board as well, mm-hmm. and listening to them, and then perhaps maybe you, Mr. Chair, have a conversation with Chair Hall afterwards, and I'd welcome any suggestions how we move forward. But I really would, I know they're here before us, but this is really planning board issue. As far as that, I'd like to see them, just out of respect, go to them with the same suggestions. I know a lot of what they said tonight, the planning board has already worked on or has been working on, unrelated to the MBTA Communities Act. So I think it might behoove all of us, including their efforts, as well as I think the planning board might appreciate it. So that would be my suggestion tonight. Thank you. And thank all of them. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. I agree with that.
Bagley Jones, I'm far away from you right now, but we go way back. So you work at one of my favorite places in the world. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Well. I agree with that, that this is certainly something that the planning board should be involved in, and would make the same request that if you all could go in front of the planning board. And I'm happy to do, to send whatever I need to do to the chair of the planning board. But I think it's important to have that board weigh in. And we have Mr. Zoll, who's willing to put his shoulder to the wheel on this, and Ms. Musto.
Thank you. I would agree that I think you should bring this to the planning board. Thank you for coming forward. I think a lot of good effort with this, and it's a tough issue because there's so many different variables, different opinions on everything, and sometimes some of the people that you may consider on a committee like this could actually be lightning rods for issues. So I think that's the thing about committees. And Ms. Bradley knows how much I love committees, because we always are trying to tackle we have so many committees. But I think it's tough. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I think there's got to be some kind of process. I don't know if that's the process, only because I think it's very difficult to pick certain people that you might think represent a good viewpoint or reasonable, and maybe they're a lightning rod for somebody else. So that is difficult. That's a difficult thing to do. But I think certainly bring it to the planning board, and we could talk about that.
Mr. Zoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Ms. Musto's point about potential lightning rods, I think it's well taken. In addition, and I 100% agree that, and I'm sure that you're planning on going to the planning board to present this. I might also suggest that you reach out to both the leaders of the yes and no campaigns and see if they might have one or two folks that they might suggest that might want to participate in something like this. And maybe you've already done that, but it's just a thought. And please, this is a dialogue, so please feel free to respond.
Can we respond?
Please, yeah, sure.
Okay, so we hear your points and we agree with them. However, this is about, membership on this is about, how do you want to move forward? So we purposely did not go to the yes and the no.
I think it's broader.
It's broader than that. But the planning board, and this really we've just been working on this. We were at the planning board last week, and we did try to say a little bit of this, but we didn't have our presentation. But we'll be happy to go back to them. But we see you as a select board as the leaders in helping in the dialogue of the town. The planning board we see as the leaders in the zoning, and we want to be part of that. But we're not suggesting what the zoning should be. We're saying, can we go back and look at those guidelines and bring people together? So, Ms. Musto, I really agree with you, and we will talk to the planning board, but we're also coming to you because we think you are the leaders in town that can really help bring this dialogue down. Because if we don't bring the dialogue down, we're not going to get anywhere on this.
So
I don't know if other people feel the same, or,
Yeah,
because we don't always agree.
I also wanted to add that there's not two Miltons.
No.
Like the yes and no, that was a spectrum. It wasn't even a spectrum. There are many reasons to vote either way.
Yep.
So even, I mean,
Thank you
I don't
for
mean,
saying that.
but I don't want to call you out. But
You can
even
call me
when
out.
you said like, oh, this has been happening since the pandemic, that's sort of assuming that there are two sides that also fell into these two categories of yes or no.
Right.
Which,
I did.
yeah, it was very. I think that maybe the leadership of the town is missing a lot of the nuance that happened on this vote. And so I think this is the kind of stuff, like, we don't want to go to yes or no. We don't want to think like, let's get so many from this side. Like, let's stop with the sides and like, let's really talk to people. So, and we actually have we've had coffees and teas with people who were heading up the different committees, which has been great. It's amazing how much 3 hours go by, when you're having this civil dialogue that's opening up your mind and making you realize that both we and the heads of different, we all still have questions about what things mean.
If I could make a suggestion, perhaps, I think it's important because it does involve the guiding principles for the zoning. I do think it's important to have the planning board involved in this. And perhaps if the planning board has 2 members, and perhaps if we have 2 members, they could work with you to, if the planning board is agreeable, to put together some kind of group like this. Does that sound like possible way forward here? I mean, subject to the planning board, obviously agreeing to it, but if there were 2 planning board members and 2 members of the select board and you all kind of get together, if they agree, to try to come up with a group that might be able to push some of these initiatives. Is that something that may work?
I think that sounds great. Yeah.
I spoke with, I mean, that's one member speaking. That's not the board. But, okay.
If I can just add to
Yeah.
that, I am also now concerned that we didn't talk to the planning board first and that they, or in conjunction, and that they are going to feel like we went to you and not to them. We can't think that way, so we want your help in explaining this to the planning board.
And I think we are all respectful and defer to the planning board on this, and I think they'll appreciate that. And I think they'll appreciate the fact that you went to them first.
Said a little of it.
Well, you didn't have your presentation ready, and that's the reason. So I think that'll be a problem. I hope it won't.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Zoll.
I'm sorry, I didn't miss. I agree. I think that the overall structure is right. I do think, though, if it's me or Mr. Wells or Ms. Musto, or not Ms. Bradley, or anybody else participating from the select board, we probably won't. We may be able to provide a little bit of thought about some of the zoning stuff, but I think it's like that particular element of this group should really be up to the planning board members to discuss it. And so my interest in this is mostly around the lowering the temperature, because I think for me that's sort of like the fundamental issue that we have in this in town right now. Just to say that there may be moments where select board members may want to either recuse themselves or just kind of keep quiet and let the planning board members chime in about the particulars of the zone.
Ms. Musto.
Thank you. The other thing you could actually consider is, instead of doing a separate little committee, is to have a facilitator run an event, a qualified facilitator run a big event where people could go, instead of having another subcommittee.
Yes.
That might be something as well, instead of or in lieu of.
That's actually one of our action steps was to suggest a facilitator who is skilled in this area, who could have small groups meet together and then go back into a larger group. We're not the facilitators.
Or even have one big group.
One big group.
One event where you had a facilitator there.
Right. Going back and forth with people at an event is not something we want to be part of. We want to be part of someone being in charge of everybody talking to each other and listening to each other. So we agree with you completely that that's what we want.
And we don't want to make any decisions. This is to help get what the town wants and bring it together. So our 3 things were create exactly what you were talking about. Maybe it can't be one for the equity reasons. Not everyone can show up at the same time. But create, say, a few dialogues in town. To create the survey. Was the 3rd one? Oh, and then the factual. We don't write the facts, but we're like, do we set up a plan where every Friday we all collect what we've heard and we give 10 questions to Tim, who answers them. I know that's easier said than done, but at least we can say there's some questions that were very simple that were hard to find the answers to. The more we can get those answers just in an accessible format, that alone would just calm everything down a little bit and help inform decisions. But we agree with you. We are not looking for a committee to start making decisions. It's just to facilitate what you guys need.
Other comments or questions? So it sounds like there is consensus on this board to move forward, subject to our friends on the planning board agreeing that it makes sense. Is that fair?
That's fair.
So we are open, available, and supportive, but we don't want to step on anyone's toes. So we'll wait to hear what they all have to say.
Yes. And we will follow up with them, and if all of you can follow up with the folks on the planning board. And also, we really want to thank you all for the amount of time that you put into this town. We know that your families suffer from the time you put in, and we really appreciate it for the time tonight, but also just in general, all of the time that you have put in the planning board and the town meeting members have put in. We really appreciate it, and the school committee. We really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
And thanks for letting us speak.
To be continued, and we'll look forward to hearing from you.
Okay.
Item 6 is our next item, and this is a nice segue because this is a report on a community forum with facilitators that was held
On an important issue.
on an important issue. So this is what we're about to talk about next is a bit of a model in some respects for what we're talking about, because this is a report on the community forum that was held on February 4th on how we dwell together in peace. And I think I hope we have Reverend Lisa Ward. Do we have Reverend Ward? Yes, she's here. So if you could promote Reverend Ward. And so item 6 is the discussion, Reverend Lisa Ward, regarding the community forum, How Do We Dwell Together in Peace, that was held on February 4th, 2024. So Reverend Ward, please take the floor. Oh, you're on mute, Reverend Ward.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly well.
Okay. Thank you to the Select Board for inviting me to report out on the forum that was How Do We Dwell Together in Peace, addressing the turmoil of perspectives on the war in Gaza and surrounding territories. Mike Zulis reached out to me to see if the Milton Interfaith Clergy Association would help shepherd a conversation with the hopes of developing the potential for more civil discourse in the town of Milton over the painful and contentious issue. And I'm here representing Micah as the president. I formed a planning committee with members of Micah and representatives from Celebrate Milton, Courageous Conversations Towards Racial Justice, Witness for Peace, the Justice and Equity for All Advisory Committee, the Milton Public Schools, and Milton Muslim Neighbors. We also arranged for security, which helped some people feel more safe coming to this discussion. We enlisted co-moderators, Dr. Carl L. Tubke and Jeffrey R. Stone, to help frame the discussion. And we started out with ground rules, which were to help create a brave space, help create a respectful and brave space to talk about a hard thing together. We offered 3 questions to be discussed in small groups with facilitators who would then report aspects of the discussion to the larger group. And one of the things that all of us as facilitators in different ways did, we served this conversation by being neutral. That was part of our service, to be neutral, to encourage dialogue. We invited people to form groups of at least 6 people, most of whom they did not know, and stay in those groups through the whole gathering. With around 65 people, we were able to include each small group into the larger sharing for each topic, and we had 3 questions. The first question was, what are the dominant emotions you've been experiencing about the turmoil over the past several months? And they spent 15 minutes in small groups, and then we reported out for 15 minutes. The second was, how do you think about and understand what's going on? So then they did 15 minutes and 15 minutes. And the third question was, how do we dwell in peace here in Milton? What steps might you take? And again, the model of 15 and 15. We gathered for 2 hours in which wildly diverse opinions were expressed with brave, open-hearted candor. The discussions were respectful, and each person had the chance to share their voice on each question. The overall response to this gathering was very positive. People felt heard and able to hear others. The feeling in the room was one of hope. Some feedback to consider was the suggestion to have one small group with people who are willing to wear masks so that all could participate. There were a few people wearing masks who felt they had to distance themselves so they could only observe the process to stay safe. Another bit of feedback was that a few were disappointed that there weren't facts or historical context presented by the moderators who clearly had some expertise to be able to do that. And that was a very intentional thing for us to do for two reasons. The highly complex history that spans hundreds, if not thousands of years, and the countless geopolitical stances would bog the 2-hour discussion down with whataboutisms and a bramble of differing facts unable to dismantle. The point was for people to find their own authority, their own voice, and their own ability to hear others. To practice this and leave having learned more about themselves and each other. To experience diverse community with the aspiration toward dwelling together in peace. It's not everything, but it's an essential foundation for any movement toward a thriving, equitable civic life. So, there ends the report. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Reverend Ward. Comments or questions for Reverend Ward?
I'm happy to go
Mr.
first.
Zoll.
I'm sorry. So along with Ms. Musto and Mr. Zulus, I had the privilege and pleasure of participating in this forum. And just for our live audience, the two moderators for this forum are both based in Milton, and I would highly recommend either of them for any sort of a moderated discussion because I think they did an excellent job. I did not know what to expect going into the discussion. The issue of Israel's war against Hamas, the war in Gaza, however you want to frame it, it's a fraught issue, and people with many diverse opinions showed up. And to the extent that we were able to sit down, listen to each other, the community moderators that the Interfaith Clergy Association selected were phenomenal. I really left that event really much more hopeful than I thought that I probably could be. Not necessarily that we had come up with the solution for what's going on right now in the Middle East, but how do we dwell together here in Milton in peace around it? If we can do that around this issue, we can surely do it around multifamily zoning. It seems to be much less historically fraught issue, although some would say maybe not. I really just want to commend Micah, all of the members for taking the lead on this, I think in a very important way for recruiting amazing facilitators, arranging the security, making as many people feel as safe as possible to have a difficult conversation. It's really was inspiring to me, and I just really many congratulations to you, Reverend Ward, and everyone else in Micah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zoll. Other comments or questions? So I will say it was challenging. It was enlightening. It was awakening. And to have 65 residents of the town or thereabouts get together and talk about some of the most contentious issues in our world today was really gratifying to see, and to do it in a respectful way and a really productive way. So it was a great afternoon. And as Mr. Zoll said, it caused me to leave with great hope about how we can come together as a community and talk about difficult issues that we disagree on. And in addition to thanking Milton Interfaith Clergy Association and Reverend Ward, who was really the driving force behind organizing this event, we do want to thank we mentioned security. The Milton Police Department provided the security for this, and so we thank them for as well. So it was a great event and really a model, I think, for discussions of difficult issues going forward. So, other comments or questions? So thank you, Reverend Ward, and I dare say we're going to use your expertise again somewhere along the line, maybe sooner rather than later.
Well, and I also just want to bring up that I've only been here 8 years, but I'm very impressed by the civic responsibility that people feel in Milton. You know, people really showed up.
Yep.
And they really wanted to do this.
It's very true. It's very true. Thank you, Reverend Ward.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Item 7, discussion approval cultural lighting display at Manning Park between March 9th and April 15th. And so I think we'll go to Mr. Milano for this.
Thank you. As if you'll recall, last year, Milton DPW installed a light display in Manning Park, and we are planning to move forward with that again this year if the select board so votes. This would coincide with Ramadan and the celebration of Eid at the conclusion of Ramadan. If the board gives the go-ahead, we'd start to coordinate installation to arrive around March 9th and then plan to start removing around April 15th.
Comments or questions from the members? Ms. Musto.
I'll make a motion, Mr. Yes.
That's good.
Okay.
I was just going to do that.
Okay.
That's fine.
Go ahead, Richard.
I was just going to make a motion that we approve the installation of the celebratory lighting, the Manning deck, to coincide with the Ramadan celebration and whatever dates Mr. Milano, I think, what do you say, March 1st to April 15th?
March 9th to April 15th.
March 9th. I was going to give him an extra 2 weeks, okay?
I'll second.
That's the 9th it is.
All right. Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Zoll?
Thank you. Just a quick comment, because I did ask about this around, I'm obviously in favor of this. I was there for the lighting to see the faces of so many people who came from many, many different communities to see these lights, because there's not a lot of towns that do this for Ramadan. It was very special, and I think we should be proud of that. Mr. Milano and I had a conversation in November about the possibility of having a menorah in Manning Park for Hanukkah. And I just want to bring that up again because, a big menorah, it's not hard. It's not easy to find a giant menorah. And also I believe that we had determined that the town would need to purchase the menorah rather than have it donated, or I was happy to donate something, but I just want to make sure that that stays on our radar, because I want to celebrate our Muslim neighbors. I want, we have a Christmas tree in Manning Park for Christmas, and I think it's important for us to think about having a menorah as well, so that everyone can see their holidays celebrated. I think we're stronger when the more holidays we can all celebrate together, the better. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Wells.
So just to follow up on that, I attended the menorah lighting on Quincy City Hall this year, which was done by our own Rabbi Benjamin. As a follow-up, I'll find out where they got that from. It's a beautiful menorah, and perhaps we can purchase the same one and keep it in.
That'd be great.
And address that as we get to Hanukkah.
Any other comments or questions? All right, this will be a roll call vote. All those in favor, Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. Item 8, discussion approval school building committee's recommendation for a designer for the new school building project. I believe we have Mr. O'Rourke from the school building committee.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, fellow members. Thank you. My name is Sean O'Rourke, 27 Quarry Lane, town meeting member, Precinct 8, and chair of the school building committee. With me tonight also from PMA Consulting is Sean Burke, also a Milton resident. Yep, in the back. What I have tonight is just a brief presentation update of kind of what we've done since the fall, and our recommendation tonight for the architect for this new project. Ms. Milano, if you go to the next slide. So, just for the public's consumption, the school building committee is made up of 9 members. The 5 at the top are appointed by the town moderator. The two at the bottom left are appointed by the school committee, and at the bottom right, the two are appointed by the select board. Our committee has just passed our 5-year mark, so the majority of this committee has been together for the past 7 years, essentially addressing the overcrowding that our children are experiencing. And, we're on our way to kind of remedying this. Next slide, please. So essentially, last time I came before you, we made a recommendation to you to onboard an owner's project manager, which is PMA Consulting. Since that point, we're working with PMA and our town administrator, Ms. Milano, to develop an RFS, or request for services, for architectural services. The request for services, we had about 45 people download the packets. We followed that up with a site visit to the site along Gile Road, and then essentially we worked down to a short list of down to 2 firms. A couple weeks ago, the school building committee interviewed 2 of these firms. One is RDA Architecture, which should not be confused with DRA Architecture, who did the last school building project, and then also Arrow Street Architecture. The result of those presentations and interviews, the school building committee unanimously chose Arrow Street Architecture. So essentially, the past couple months we've been building a team of professionals to address this, and we're ready to start going into planning and design. The initial steps that we're going to be taking is working with the district for visioning. And working on the internals of this new building, basically what goes on in there, how the layout's done, stuff like that. There's also an external component to it of meeting with neighbors, meeting with concerned citizens, for different issues that are there. So all that's going to be coming over the next couple months. Next slide, please. So the architecture firm that you're going to see here is well-rounded. They take into account school planning, educational planning, traffic, landscape, and then every form of architecture all the way through their construction phase services. So the people that you see here, when the project is started under construction, will be the same people administering the construction. One of the key factors that weighed heavily with some of the committee members is this firm's commitment to net zero buildings. So for them, it's not a specialty, it's basically their modus operandi. That's how they operate. It's not a specialty, it's nothing like that. So that was one of the things that made some separation. Next slide. This slide is big. So this is their team. So these are the sub-consultants that are on there. So, leading up to the concerns that were raised last year as we're going through the land swap and stuff like that. As you can see here, there's a very large roster of anything that gets presented. We have a consultant and a professional to address it. Next slide. So here's what they presented. And essentially, I want to preface this as these are concepts. These are not what we're building. This is what they presented to us to kind of display what they could do. So on the site here, seeing is what they call the Consolidated strategy, which is, again, for people that are, for the public, this project is consisting of an upper middle school for 7th and 8th grade, along with preschool. So this Consolidated strategy has a singular building that has all grade levels, 7th, 8th, and preschool all together, but obviously separated by wings, so we don't have kids mixing together. The next concept, if you go to concept 2, this is what they're calling a campus strategy, where they separate the 2 buildings. So for us, as we were reviewing these interviews or options that were presented to us against the other consultant, this looked a little bit better too, because it gave us a little more flexibility of different things. At least they were thinking differently. Next slide. So one of the main things that's coming up, we're about to submit to MSBA, again, our statement of interest. My concern, as I've stated publicly, is this statement of interest is reviewed by the Mass School Building Authority. In light of recent things within the town, not to resurrect all that, I'm not expecting us to get accepted to this. So my concern has always been, if we don't get accepted to that, what do we do? Part of a project, and this is one of the things that we asked them to look at as part of their evaluation criteria of non-MSBA projects against MSBA projects. An MSBA project it's a government project. There's a lot of paperwork, a lot of checks and balances. It stretches the project out very far. other projects that are non-MSBA funded can go a lot faster and basically saving time, and time is money in construction. So this is one of the things we're looking at right now. If you go to the next slide, please. The project that they showed up there that got completed is non-MSBA, just so you can see that, you know, it's a beautiful building. The interiors are nice. This is the Brook High School that's over in Boston, I believe, on Cummings Highway. So next slide, please. So one of the things that they did is, you know, at this point right now, they looked at a conceptual project schedule. And what we're aiming for is in the fall town meeting to have a basic schematic design done, a finite estimate of that schematic design, so we can present kind of what the cost of this is going to be a lot better than the square footage costs that we've been publicly talking about. And then the hope of that, you know, assuming we get green lights all the way, is jump right into construction at this time next year. The construction that we're looking at is doing two packages, a site package, which is called Chapter 30 construction that is there, and basically the realignment of the road, clear the site to have it ready for a building. And while that's going on, have construction documents started for the vertical portion of the construction, the building. So once that site prep is done, we then hit the ground and start having foundations poured, utilities, and framing. With that, they estimate about a 24-month construction. So what that means is by the summer of 2027, we'll be completing a school and ready to open it in fall of 2027. Next slide. And with that, I'll open to any questions.
Comments or questions from the members? We should take this down so I can see it. Oh, I see Richard. Okay, yeah. Okay, I want to make sure I see Richard. Ms. Bradley.
Thank you so much, Mr. O'Rourke. I just want to make sure that I heard that correctly, that we could open a new school in fall of 27.
Assuming all funding, green lights, there's no red lights.
No
and
red
there's
lights
no blinking,
along the way.
and no blinking yellow lights.
No blinking yellow. Okay. And when you say fall town meeting, do you mean this year, fall town meeting? Do
Correct.
you mean a December town meeting? What do you mean by, because
Ideally, for us, we would like to have a special town meeting early in the fall so that we could have this kind of addressed. Because after the requests that we'll need for additional funding to build this out, it would have to go to a town-wide vote.
I'm thinking about the town clerk and about just how difficult her life is this year and the entire department's life is this year. Because yet again, we have another election this month and one again next month. So I'm just trying to consolidate this. So I'm wondering, thank you. That's all I want to know. I just wanted to say thank you. So September is what you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, at some point in the fall. I don't.
No, I know that, but like September, not December.
Not December.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry.
Other comments or questions? Ms. Musto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know you mentioned the MSBA and that you're reapplying, but how many times have you guys applied? I thought it's been 4. Right?
We've applied 4 times, so it's a competitive venture that we do. We're not the only town that applies, and essentially each year it's a discretionary decision that they make on that. So it's not just you apply and you're given you get into it. Basically, each year as you apply, there's steps, at least from what we've seen, where the second year, I believe we applied, the first or second year, I apologize, they'll do an interview following that statement of interest, and then they'll do a site visit. We actually got to the site visit on our second try, so we were almost there. This past time, we had the follow-up interview. They did not do the site visit.
May I ask a couple follow-ups? Sure. Yeah. How many square feet are we looking at in these schools, and what is the ballpark cost?
So, as I mentioned before, I believe the approximate square footage is about 115,000 square feet, and around there we were carrying about $700 a square foot, $750 a square foot. The numbers that we've advertised before is roughly $80 to $90 million.
And may I ask another follow-up?
Please, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I know that we have a lot of new energy code and so forth.
Correct.
How does that affect the school building project?
So, as I said, the way they're doing this right now is a net zero goal that they have for this. In their presentation, what they did is looked at rebates that are a part of that, and part of that escalated construction cost to hit a net zero building, you make up in certain rebates that are out there for tax incentives. Then further, having a net zero building over the long term of a building, because once we build it, it's going to be there for 50 years. The savings over that 50 years essentially pays for a lot of that too.
Please, yeah, please.
Thank you. Will this, so if we're going to go towards net zero on the building cost, and I know that we'll have the savings, what are the upfront costs on that? I know we have rebates and things, but you know, if a building without those particular net zero is X number of dollars, how much more does it drive the cost?
It's so
even with the rebate.
Yeah. So with us right now, we're not.
You don't have that right now.
Well, yeah. Just to be clear, too, I'm not saying that we are going to build a net zero building. All right. So just so I can be clear on that, right? What I'm saying is the architects have the ability right now to do that as like their normal practice. In building trends right now, a lot of that's happening. I know. Before you coming at some point is the opt-in energy code that's there for electrification of a lot of things. What happens with that is if you adopt that, and it falls under with this building, it requires you to basically build out the front end of it so you can electrify the entire building. So even if you put fossil fuels in, you can make the switch. So what happens is once you have that in there, if that gets adopted, that's going to be baked into the cost anyways. They will have to do that. So once you kind of get to that level, the little bit more to go to net zero isn't really that big of a leap. Whereas if this was 10 years ago and we were doing everything fossil fuel based and we wanted to get to net zero by electrifying everything, it would be a much larger leap because the technology wasn't there then. It's starting to catch up now very quickly. So, you know, but again, just to be clear, I'm not saying that we are doing a net zero building. I think it would be amazing if we could. But as we're weighing that, that's part of, you know, the cost of doing that. We'll definitely weigh in on that decision.
Thank you.
No problem.
Is that?
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
There you go.
Thank you, Sean. Just a couple of points. First off, at MS on school building assistance, as you know, we've talked about this personally. Part of the difficulty is it was not that long ago that we received 90%, and there are still communities in the queue. I had one mention it to me recently that has been waiting as long as since we did our first schools and has not gotten anything yet, and that's a difficulty that you're having to deal with, and probably will result in a lesser degree, as you know, that we will get any money for that. So my question is, based on the expedited timeline going direct, in either you, because I know Michael sits on the committee as well, are you anticipating a debt exclusion override for early 25?
So
don't all jump at once.
I mean, so anything to do for our next phase, whether we go for, you know, the funding to complete the design, you know, the typical design costs are roughly 10 to 12 to 15% of the overall construction cost. So a typical design cost would be somewhere in the region of $10 million to $11 million. If we were going to do that, we'd have to do a debt exclusion regardless for that. If it's in regards, if we decide to go, you know, fund the entire project for one time and ask for all that, that would have to do a debt exclusion also. So I think the realization is that we're looking for is the funding that you guys appropriated us, and thank you, because that's getting us going, is probably only going to last us till September. And at that point, we're going to need additional funding at that point, probably through a debt exclusion, to keep the project on track and keep it going. And so we're talking the fall of 2024.
Okay, so I got it. The first debt exclusion, fall of 2024.
Assuming for, you know, I think it would depend. If we're funding the entire project this fall, then it would be one debt exclusion at that time for the entire project, or if we're doing the component of it just for the design and then a follow-on one for the construction.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other comments or questions? I will just point out that the money for this was approved by town meeting. So there's no additional funding required for this contract. This is the designer that was modeled.
Not tonight. But tonight, we don't need a motion.
Yeah, no, we're going to have a motion. The request from the school building committee is to approve Arrow Street as the designer. My only comment, Richard, was that the money for this was approved by town meeting in December.
So I'll make a motion, Mr. Chair, to approve Arrow Street to fulfill this aspect of the school building systems project.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
Discussion, item 9, discussion update approval of the FY 2025 budget recommendation. And do we have Mr. Milano and/or the chair of our finance committee, Ms. Bradley?
Well, I will kick it off because it's always good to kick something off and then pass it to the person that knows the most. So
Okay.
I will be kicking it to Nick. I just want to let everybody know that we have been meeting with the school committee as much as possible. It's been a little bit difficult the last week or so. And so the last time that I think that we spoke, and Mr. Zoll, correct me if I'm wrong, we were about $4 million in the hole last time that we brought this to the select board. So I'm really happy to have the floor turn over with a disco ball to Nick about where we are with the current FY 25 budget.
Sure, thank you. I will share my screen and walk through a presentation with the budget, and then obviously we can take the discussion and questions from there. And I'll note that Finance Director Amy Dexter is here as well, so anything I can't answer, she certainly can, and probably do so better than I. So I will try to put my best foot forward here first. So just to set the budget in context in terms of the big picture here, we have worked towards first satisfying a level service budget to maintain the existing services our departments, the town departments and the schools are providing. We have certainly received requests from both the schools as well as from the town departments for a needs-based budget that would invest in those departments to expand the level of services that we can provide, whether that's at the Council on Aging, the Health Department, to the school department. We have received those requests across the town. The other big thing I wanted to point out that this year, with the Milton retirement system hitting full funding this fiscal year, that opens up additional budget flexibility that we did not have previously, as we were making significant payments into the retirement system to get to full funding. It's state law that all pension systems be fully funded by 2040, so we are well ahead of that mark. And that means we have approximately $2.5 million of savings that are flowed through to the operating budget this year that previously would have been going into the pension system. In addition to that, we are making this year a $1.5 million contribution to our OPEB trust for our long-term liabilities for retirement benefits. And a $1 million contribution going to Milton Retirement to further build up the reserves in our pension system to navigate it through any potential fiscal downturns that could arise. Those funding schedules are set for a 2-year period, so for the next 2 years we'll contribute $1 million more than we need to further build those reserves. On the revenue side, Milton's revenue picture is fairly stable. There's not new sources of revenue coming through that will fundamentally change the makeup of our budget. So our growth that we're anticipating in fiscal 25 is pretty typical for what folks will expect. So just to set our base forecasts, we have property tax revenues at about $101 million, local receipts, think motor vehicle excise tax, your trash fees, your building permit fees, all accrue to local receipts. One other I should mention is interest income, money earned on our money in banks, is accrued under what we categorize as local receipts. We charge our enterprise funds for costs borne by the water, sewer, and enterprise funds in the town department operating budget. State aid is another big factor, and then available funds. So I'll address each of these in a little bit more detail in the next couple of slides. So as you can see with our history on local receipts, fiscal 23, which closed last year, June 30th, we brought in $10.7 million in local receipts, well above our projected forecast. For fiscal 25, we have increased our forecast up to 9.9, almost a $10 million number. What drove that significant increase in fiscal 23 was investment income, interest income. We all are experiencing high interest rates, for better or worse, depending on if you're talking about your mortgage or your savings account. But for the town, in terms of the money that we store in the banks, we are doing very well. That has continued this year. We have already exceeded fiscal 23's interest income so far in fiscal 24. So that will close out to free cash at the close of this year. So we have increased our forecast for those for this source of revenue in fiscal 25 up to $500,000. As now we're trying to forecast out a year from now or more in terms of where will the interest rates be, what kind of money will we be earning. So it does get to be a tricky forecast. On state aid, this is where the news isn't as good. State tax revenues have been coming under forecast. I clipped some highlights from a Boston Globe article earlier this month, which identifies that the state revenues are lagging behind. The state has lowered its forecast. Governor Healy has done budget cuts. And while the economy continues to be doing well, for whatever reason, and the state hasn't really clearly expanded on what's going on, the state revenues are not coming in where they anticipate they will. For Milton, that means our state aid is going backwards. In fiscal 25, we will receive the $30 per pupil increase. That is the minimum aid increase that districts receive for state education aid. In prior years, we have received significantly more funding in state aid than we had been in some time, but that has come to an end for fiscal 25. I'll just note that this is broadly reflective of a trend in Massachusetts. There's just less money going to education aid in the governor's budget in fiscal 25, and it's having a particular impact on the town of Milton. I'll just point out that this chart shows our net state aid, so this is what money comes to us, what money the state charges us for. It's declining from fiscal 24 to 25. We will have about $50,000 less in net state aid in fiscal 25 than in fiscal 24. And as you can see from this chart alone, that hasn't happened previously. There have been years of slower growth for sure, but to go backwards, we're in unusual times for that. So that puts an added crunch on our budget in terms of it's just not any new revenue that we can count on there. And its chart's not great, but this just shows the percent change from year to year. So you can see where the past couple of years have been good to Milton, and now we're back below, more in line with our historical trend has been. Free cash is another revenue source. This is essentially, money that we brought in over forecast in the prior year, monies that weren't spent by town departments in that prior year. The 4.4 figure in fiscal 22 that we used in last year's budget was far and away the highest we've had in some time, $3.3 million this year. And of that, $400,000 has been appropriated. That was done at the December town meeting for the school building committee. $955,000 of free cash has been penciled in for the capital budget. We've had an initial review of the capital budget. We expect approval of the capital budget on Thursday morning by the Capital Improvement Planning Committee for the $955,000 in free cash. Opioid settlements, so we have received money related to opioid settlements, and we received that in fiscal 23. That closed out to free cash. It's included in the $3.3 million. We can only use that for purposes related to those settlements, so that's not available to be spent just generally on the town's budget. And that leaves us about $1.8 million in unallocated free cash. We have some ARPA funds, federal funds that are unspent and unallocated to date. Those funds need to be incurred by the end of calendar year 24, and the funds need to be spent by the end of calendar year 26. So we need to draw those down and start incurring those expenses in order not to have those go back to the Treasury, the federal treasurer. And then the other revenue source that we looked at are potential fee increases. So on the fee increases, we spent some time evaluating potential sources of revenue, and I have a recommendation here around trash fees. So we have a cart fee that is billed annually for 52 weeks at $3 a week or $156 per year, and then there is a senior citizen discount available for the carts. The stickers are sold $3 each, and they're sold in bulk to retailers, also out of town hall. And so what my recommended budget here contemplates is a $1 increase to those fees. And as you can see here with the history on the trash sticker and cart fee revenue versus what our solid waste expenses are, is the revenue has not kept up. If you go back to 17, it was pretty close to paying for itself. It's not necessarily set up to, but that's what it used to do. And over time, that purchasing power has been eroded as our costs increase, both our trucking costs as well as our tipping fees that we pay based on the amount of trash we collect. So we're looking at, in fiscal 25, assuming no increase on the trash sticker cart fee, we'd be looking at taxpayers supporting solid waste by more than $500,000, $573,000, which is starting to be a very significant departure from where this historically has been. And the $3 fee has been in place since fiscal 2006. The other big item I wanted to talk about was health insurance. So health insurance, the town is self-insured. We pay, and the employees pay into a trust. The trust pays our medical claims. We had a significant drop in claims during COVID as many people stopped choosing elective procedures, which has resulted in the trust maintaining its strong financial condition. As that has been the case, we have used the trust to mitigate increases on health insurance. Last year, if you'll recall, there was a 0% premium increase. This year, we're recommending a 3% premium increase, as well as a premium holiday for all employees. So one pay period of no payment of health insurance costs. That saves both the employees money as well as the town. And it's a way to draw down this trust slowly but surely. And coming up with this projection, we use advice from both the carriers that we have, Blue Cross Blue Shield and Harvard Pilgrim, as well as advisor, to come up with a strategy to draw down these funds without putting the town at risk of needing to then significantly increase health insurance rates or otherwise increase costs. So if we kind of take a step back and think about what are all of our revenues, including some of the items I've mentioned. So we get to a revenue number of $133.5 million, assuming we're using $1.8 million in free cash, assuming we're drawing down the remainder of our ARPA funding, federal funds, and assuming the trash fee is increased. And that gets us to a level service expenditures fully funded at that figure. And I've just produced kind of the schools and the town departments level service budgets below, so you can see what that would mean for those budgets. And I know this is a little bit different than what we talked about at our finance committee meeting on Monday. After our conversation, we took some time to review kind of what some of our foundational assumptions were and made a few changes, and I'll just outline what those were in terms of providing some transparency as to what we've changed. So I talked about one already. We increased our forecast on interest income. So sorry, to take a step back. On Monday, we were still trying to resolve about a $450,000 gap between our revenues and our expenditures, and hearing from folks that really try to work towards funding that level service budget fully. We increased our forecasted revenues for interest income. We reduced our health insurance premium increase from a 3.5% premium increase to a 3% increase. Working with the assessors, we had been using an amount of $850,000 in anticipated new growth. Charlie O'Shea and Curtis Ross spent some time and recommended increasing that to $1 million. So that was an additional $150,000. And lastly, we cut our expected appropriation into our overlay, which is the account where we set monies aside for potential appellate tax board cases, abatements, exemptions. We reduced that appropriation by about $150,000, anticipating that what will ultimately go into the overlay will be sufficient for our needs in fiscal '25. So we can fund the departments and the school department's level service requests with the budget as kind of scoped out here. But I did just want to kind of conclude, and this speaks to Mr. Fundling's comments from earlier, that this budget is really made possible by that $2.5 million approximately from the retirement system hitting full funding. It was expected to happen that we would get to this point. It was expected to happen 2 years from now. So when we hit full funding 2 years earlier, it was truly unexpected. And the best possible kind of version of that in terms of the good news that we could use for this year's budget. Collective bargaining agreements expire at the end of fiscal '25. Net state aid declined in fiscal '25, and we shouldn't be looking to significant increases in state aid until that story starts heading in the other direction, and the school project, of course, is moving forward. So, and the last item it's not a bullet here, but as we've tried to think hard about our revenue forecasts, I think where we have budgeted conservatively, and that has created the free cash that gives us the flexibility to fund items in a future year budget. So as we edge away from that conservative budgeting, we should anticipate less free cash in future years. This year, we're doing very well in some regards, and as I mentioned with the interest income. But I do just want to kind of close out this piece of the presentation of fiscal '25 by looking to the future and kind of the trickier budget situations we'll have in future years, that working towards a balanced level service budget in fiscal '25 does not mean we've solved the structural fiscal challenges that faces our budget, and we'll continue to have those, and happy to work with this board and the school committee and others to work towards kind of fundamentally reshaping how we're going to think about this budget moving forward. But they will be more challenging this year, as challenging as this year may have been or has been to date. And with that, happy to take any questions, speak to anything in more detail, and go from there.
Comments or questions from the members? Thank you, Nick. Ms. Musto.
Thank you. Nick, I know that we get money for the DCR land, for instance. How much are we getting for that this year, and has that gone up?
It has, I don't believe, so the way that works is the state pays a payment in lieu of taxes essentially to the town for all the state-owned land in town. And it has been a place where they have invested more money in recent years, and we've benefited that from state aid. I believe, that is level funded from prior years. It wasn't reduced, but is not increasing in any way in this year's budget.
Mm-hmm. In ballpark, what is that? Do you know?
I think it's like 1.5, but I have it, and I can, give me a second, I can pull it for you, unless Amy knows off the top of her head. No.
We just got an email about it.
Wait till you find that.
So state-owned land in fiscal '24 was $1.541 million. In fiscal '25, it's going to be $1.548, so $7,000 increase.
Okay. And with regards to the trash, where are we in that contract at this point? Because the costs are going up, so I'm just wondering, where are we in that contract?
The haulers contract is good until the close of fiscal '25. I believe it's through fiscal '25. It's either '25 or '26. I'll follow up with you to confirm that, but
okay.
We're locked in for at least all of '25 and I think '26.
Okay. And so are you saying that we have enough, with all of these changes, that we can provide level service for the town side?
Correct.
So it's still the school side has?
We're one town.
No, but the school committee came in and had voted for an override, right? So that's
So,
No.
yeah, there's.
Maybe you can clarify.
So,
Maybe
yeah,
Nick
no,
can
so
clarify.
what this budget I already presented today would fund everybody's level service requests.
Okay.
So the needs-based, which on the school side, and that was an additional $1,075,000 in addition to their level service. That would fund a variety of needs that the schools can certainly speak to in more detail than I can.
Okay.
On the town side, we received, I didn't triage the request in any way, but in terms of sheer dollars, it was $1.8 million in needs-based requests from town departments. So that was kind of all the asks every department made totaled $1.8 million of the town departments.
And with the free cash, what does that leave us in free cash?
So that would assume the $400,000 for the school building committee, the $955,000 for capital, $156 set aside for the opioid settlements, and then the remainder going back into the fiscal 25 budget. So it would close out all of the free cash, and
So we would have no free cash?
And that's what we typically do
Yeah,
through the
yeah.
budget is spend it all down at this point.
Okay.
Not necessarily on budgetary items, sometimes to stabilization and elsewhere. This year it would go into the operating budget. Sure.
So my follow-up would be, so we're not putting any of the free cash into stabilization or anything then?
Not in this recommendation, correct.
And we're anticipating that next year is going to be tougher?
Correct.
And we're not going to have that money?
Yeah, I think that's correct. That is the risk, is as we think about where the years will be. But I would also wouldn't recommend drawing down from stabilization unless we're talking about an economic slowdown that really is disrupting our receipts and disrupting the economy broadly. Because we have a tough budget year and don't want to make tough decisions isn't a reason to just use the stabilization fund that's there for that. So I wouldn't say that because next year might be tough, we should have the stabilization fund. We need other ways to resolve that issue next year.
Okay.
And the other element, where I feel comfortable with the stabilization funds is we're above a 5% threshold of our budget, which is a good place to be. I would say we want to continue to grow that and target investing there. But we're one of a handful of communities that have fully funded our retirement system. We're one of a handful of communities heavily investing in OPEB. And those are places that we are ahead of the curve on a lot of other communities and have flexibility that those communities don't. So it gives us a little bit more freedom to make some decisions on those issues.
Okay, thank you.
And just, Nick, before we go further, you mentioned that we have more than 5% in our stabilization fund. If you could just give us the number so everyone knows what we have in our state.
Sure.
About 5.5 million or
yeah, so we have
thereabouts?
3 stabilization funds, and I group them together in terms of thinking about what is set aside. And I don't have the figure right in front of me, but if altogether it's over 5% of our general fund operating budget. In those 3 stabilization funds.
We're not putting anything in this year.
I understand. I understand. But it's a healthy number. We
Yes.
recently put in, I think when we took out money for COVID, we put it back in the next
We
year,
did.
which was certainly something that the bond markets liked.
And $500,000 was put into stabilization last year out of the $4.4 million in free cash.
Right. Mr. Wells and then Mr. Zoll.
I've forgotten. So 3 things, and I'll be quick. First, thank you, Nick. That was a great job, and we've talked about this a lot. This is a tough year. One, how fast would we implement the trash increases July 1?
Yes. Correct, July 1st.
Okay. Number 2, and this is kind of for anyone who was on finance, could be Aaron, Michael, because this goes back. I do recall in ARPA, and I'm probably wasting my time here, in some of the ARPA funds, the communities who didn't spend all of it, it was going to go back into like a regional pot. Do we know if there's any money in that was not spent? I'm not sure it was the Norfolk.
Yep.
It was.
It's the county funding.
It was, yeah.
It's the county money, right, Michael?
Yeah.
Was it right? The Norfolk
That's right.
County money?
That's right. It's a county money. Nick, I think, has been bird dogging that. So
Yeah, so the way that'll work is the county is expecting, has inquired just even the last several weeks for updates on any projects funded with the county share of our ARPA funding.
Right.
With the intention of, if it's not earmarked and being drawn down, it's going back to the county, so it then can be reallocated to communities to be spent. So we're in pretty good shape on that, where we've basically spent almost all of the county share. There's a couple projects that are still outstanding. Other communities haven't quite gotten there yet, so there might be an avenue for Milton to benefit from some potential additional funds, but nothing guaranteed.
Okay, and then one more, Michael, is that it, Mr. Chair? One more follow-up.
please.
So with regard to the override, and I understand what Chair Carroll brought forward tonight, and I did have 2 conversations the past 3 days with Mark Loring. As anyone who knows who's ever worked on an override in this town, it's very hard. Mr. Fundling was right when he said tonight you have to start next year. Our former member Katie Collin and I talked a lot about this on Sunday, and it takes a lot of work, but what I'm looking at here, or from what is being said, or what we're looking at, I mean, you're kind of painting the picture for operationally, Nick, and what you're doing for us. At least that's how I see it. But the difficulty would be, so we would be looking at potentially a debt exclusion override for the schools in the fall, and an operational override this spring for town services. Is everyone seeing that same picture I'm seeing?
Yes.
Am I seeing it wrong?
That's the current potential forecast right now, yes.
Well, that's definitely an ocean we've never sailed in before, let's say.
Well, the other option is, I mean, not to interject, but the other option is
go ahead.
We can do, so we've been looking at this, Mr. Wells, for months, and the fact of the matter is that, I served for 5 years on the warrant committee. I've served now 2 years on the select board finance committee. We've been saying since I'm pretty sure I started doing these items that we needed an override, and we have not done it. And what the finance committee, what I think the finance committee is bringing to the select board this evening is we can fund a level budget. We can fund it. Nick.
In 25, for 25.
For 25, yeah. That's what, all I'm talking about is 25. I'm going to get to 26 in a second, but for 25, we can fund it. If the select board feels that we should do an override this year, then I am here to say, please talk to me. I don't know that Mr. Zoll wants to be the sole person that says, this is the year we're doing an override, right? But I'm gonna say this, after being involved in this for the last 7 years of my life, there is absolutely no way around an override for fiscal year 26. So what I would instruct the staff and for all the departments to do is to start talking to the community about an override and why it's needed. There is a lot of one-time cash that's being used in this budget. There's a lot of, the paying off the retirement fund. There's all kinds of things that Nick has put into this budget, Nick and Amy, sorry Amy, that they put into this budget to have it be level funded for this year. To be honest with you, Mr. Wells, and I'm gonna shoot right from my cuff because that's how I am. I don't know that we could do an override this year. If y'all think that we can, then I am open to that. But honestly, I don't know that our town can do that this year. And so what Nick and I and Amy and Mr. Zoll and the school committee, finance committee has tried to do is come up with a way so that we can literally shoestring and bubble gum this together for another year. But I am right now telling the citizens of this town that we will need an override for the following year. If we do not have an override for the following year, our town structure will not be able to survive. Period.
Richard, are
So-
you all set? Or-
Sorry, I didn't.
Am I supposed to respond to this?
Yeah, please.
You can have the floor if you want it.
Please.
No, there aren't a lot of things that, other than like things within the police department, but there aren't a lot of things that I really spent a lot of time with and have been involved in intricately for almost 30 years now. I think since 1986 was the first one. Been on every override committee. I can't believe I'm that old. And I'll reiterate what I said to Mark this weekend, and I believe this is why Mr. Funneling kind of painted the picture in the way, I agree with what he was saying about caring for it. We would be wasting our time. We're not, overrides are hard. It's very, very hard to ask the citizens for extra money. It's just, as you saw, as Mr. Milano just presented, you're seeing a tailing off or a decrease in funding statewide. You're seeing a decrease in revenues. And that impacts. We have a lot of seniors that own home. They live in, there's reasons why we have senior workout programs. There's reasons why we have, discounts on certain things. Those are things that are really, really intricate because the town of Milton is made up of everyone. Whether you're a newborn who just came into this world, or you're a 99-year-old person living in Fuller Village, or in their home somewhere, it's been here for all of their life. And we have to represent all of them. So to your point, my answer, this is why I know it's a lengthy answer. I'm not going to sound it as dire as you did right now, Aaron, but I do believe that we need, if we're getting to that year, and as I said to Nick, it used to be every 5 years, and you remember Mike, you've been on stretch it to 7, and then sometimes you get to 8, and I think, how many years are we, Nick, on this one? Are we at 8 or 9?
8.
Since the last operational?
This will, if it's 26, it'll be 8.
Okay, so 8 years, which is 26. And the second most important thing, we have to be prudent in what we go for. Just because you go for an override, you can't throw every single request into a basket and go, okay, it's $5 million or $4.5 million, this is what we're going for this year. We have to be very smart. I know Amy's in the room, and I'm sure she's relating to what I'm saying here. We have to be very prudent in the things that are needed to support the infrastructure, the things that are needed to enhance the town, the things that are needed to maintain the quality of life that people expect, without placing any further burden financially on those who this will really, really be hard for. There will be those. There's a reason we have a food pantry. And that food pantry is very well. There's a reason why we have a Milton Residence Fund. They are both heavily used in this town each and every week, and we have to keep them in just as much in our thoughts and concerns as those who are much better off. That's just my thought on it, and I get it. I accept what you say, Aaron. I'm willing to prepare. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are we taking a vote on this? Do we need to vote this tonight, or do you want to wait till Mr. Milano levels this? Mr. Chair.
We could make a
Well,
motion.
Ms. Bradley can respond to the question, and then Mr. Zoll.
So we are not looking for a vote this evening, Mr. Wells. What we're looking for is guidance, and the guidance that I'm looking for specifically is whether or not the select board has an appetite to do an override this year or an override next year. And that's the main thing that I'm looking for, because if we want to do an override this year, we will revamp the budget and come up with something else. If we are willing to wait and just have a level funded budget this year, I would like the select board's commitment that they will work towards an override next year, because I'm looking at this. There is no way.
I think you know where I'm at. Thanks. I'm all
you.
set. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you both.
Mr. Zoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So been a privilege to serve with Member Bradley on the Finance Committee. I've said this before, and I will say it again. The structure, the fundamental underpinning of this town and its tax structure is not sustainable. We have built single-family housing up the wazoo, if I can say that word. I feel like it's safe. And we have not brought in commercial revenue. If you compare us to towns that we like to compare ourselves to, the amount of commercial revenue that we get in this town is insufficient. It's the burden is on our residents and our property owners, because that's how we've structured this town, to put the burden on the residents. And I want to be clear when we're talking about a level funding, we're talking about a level funding of a school system that spends per student less than $2,000 less than the state average per student. So we're talking about a school system who is also underfunded. We have amazing teachers, amazing administrators. They make it work, but we have placed a burden because of the way that this town is structured. We have placed an enormous burden on them and on property owners to try to make this work. The math is not going to work on this for Milton any longer. We've pretty much hit the end of the runway. So we can choose to be a town that routinely has an override every 3-4 years. We could choose that. We could choose that path. We could choose to be a town that doesn't have an override every 3 or 4 years and just sees a steady degrading of our town services, not just schools, but everything, Council on Aging, police and fire. Or we can really take initiative on our own as a town to decide that we're going to bring commercial tax revenue here, that we are going to bring denser housing to Milton, which provides better bang for the buck on a per acre basis for tax dollars than single family housing does. We have to start making some tough choices. The override is almost an easy choice, because it's just like, here's the sort of immediate question. Do we want to continue to ask our teachers to do more with less, or do we want to actually have a school system where our kids are getting the resources and the services that they truly need, particularly in this post-pandemic era? I don't see a future for Milton that doesn't either involve regular overrides or bringing in significant commercial and multifamily housing. The third future is one that I daresn't say aloud, which is that we want to just decline and go and become a place that nobody wants to live. That's not what I want. I don't think that's what anybody wants. So, I know people hear me say this and they think that I'm being glib about this. I understand just as much as anybody else understands the burdens that the property owners in this town face and the tough decisions that we're going to have to make. But we really, as a town, need to commit ourselves to either putting ourselves on a sustainable financial footing by diversifying our tax base, or admitting that we're going to need to raise tax revenues regularly until nobody can afford to live here. I don't think anybody wants that either. So please, let's have the discussion now, because we're at a point where we have to have it now about whether we should have an override this year or next year. Personally, I feel like it's politically hard, but we owe it to our kids and our teachers, and frankly the town and town employees that have needs, to consider an override this year. But at the same time, we must move forward with bringing in more commercial revenue to this town, with bringing in more multifamily housing to this town. It's no mistake that if we had voted yes on one, that would have resulted in a net increase of $1 million a year in our tax revenue. That's probably not enough, but it would have been an increase overall. We need to move in this direction. Otherwise, we're not going to be sustainable in the long run. So I am supportive of the idea of considering an override this year. I think that we owe it to our town to consider it. And ultimately, considering an override really does leave it to the voters to make up their mind. We don't decide if we're going to have an override and then it happens. It's up to the voters. So I think that we ought to put the choice to the voters about whether they want to have our schools start to approach even just the state average, which is not something that we should aspire to, but even just to get closer to the state average so that we can start having the services that our kids need who are in real difficulty after the pandemic. Those are my thoughts, Mr. Chair.
Other comments or questions? So a couple of things, and just to correct, and I think it was a slip of the tongue, but Mrs. Zoll, you mentioned level funding. This isn't level funding, this is level service.
Level service, sorry,
Level
thank you.
service. So this is a level service budget. This means we're going to be able to provide the same level of services. And it's my view that if we're able to balance our budget the way we are here and provide level service, we cannot ask our residents for an override. That's my view. It is a budget that provides for no cuts, and so in that instance, I don't believe we can ask our residents for an override. A couple of one question and then one comment, Mr. Milano. In this budget, does this allow for the police department to provide an enforcement officer up in East Milton under this budget currently?
Sorry, I'm losing you on that.
Enforcement officer?
So we
had an enforcement
additional
officer. Yeah.
resources for traffic enforcement included in the fiscal 24, so
Right.
that would be rolling into this budget
Okay.
here
So we'll be able to provide
Maintains.
more enforcement up in East Milton
and throughout the town.
and throughout the town, but particularly up in East Milton in terms of ticketing people who are not ticketing, particularly delivery trucks that are not complying with their obligations.
Correct.
Okay. Second, the reason we're able to balance this budget at the level service level is because our retirement system is at full funding 2 years early. And so I feel compelled to mention some of the names of some of the people who set us on that course and helped set us on that course in the warrant committee back 12 or 13 years ago. And made it a goal to pay off and fully fund our retirement system within a period of time. And some of the members of that warrant committee that I served with were Tom Hurley and Ewan Innes and Leroy Walker and Nathan Bork and Cheryl Tagayas and Barbara Martin, Carolyn Cahill and Omar Sanchez. And I'm not going to remember them all. And Amy was there at the time. She had just started as town accountant. And it was really the members of that warrant committee, at least in my view, that had a large role in setting the goal to pay off this retirement system far into the future, it seemed at the time. And to have that be the reason that we're able to do that tonight, I think is certainly a credit to a lot of their efforts. And I wish I could remember more of the names, but hopefully I've got a lot of them. So this is good work, I think. Good work by our finance chair, our finance committee, and particularly you, Mr. Milano, and our friends on the school committee, finance committee, and the school committee. We recognize the gaps that are there. They're going to have to be filled, but this year at the level service level, it seems to me that's what we need to move forward on. So, any other comments or questions? All right, so I think you have a sense of direction on that, and we'll probably have to take a vote at a subsequent meeting.
Probably the next meeting we'll come back to you with a vote. So
All right.
thank you.
All right. Anything further on that? Seeing none? All right. Item 10, discussion, update, approval, Milton Landing Lot B proposals from Dexter, Southfield, and the Milton Yacht Club. And is this Mr. Wells or Mr. Milano or both? Or
I can
how would you
speak
Mr.
to
Milano,
Nick can let Nick run on this.
All right.
I'm on board with it.
Okay.
Thank you. So since we had put out the RFP for Milton Landing and brought in the 2 responses, I've been working with both Dexter Southfield as well as the Milton Yacht Club about coming up with a solution that works for those 2 entities as well as the Neponset Rowing Club to have access to the Milton Landing and have the storage that they need down there. Dexter Southfield has proposed installing a new dock, a new low-profile dock that would be open to members of the public for canoers, kayakers, paddleboarders, and anybody that needs a low-profile dock to get out into the river, including Neponset Rowing Club and Milton Crew, and in addition to their payments on the lease agreement. I had a meeting last week with Mr. Potter and Eric Forsyth from the Milton Yacht Club, who we talked extensively about Lot A and their abilities to use Lot A for winter boat storage. And they're amenable to a plan where they would have access to Lot A for winter boat storage moving forward, knowing that Dexter Southfield would occupy a Lot B. Sequentially, how that would work is that we would, if approved, execute a short-term lease with Dexter for Lot A for the next several months, so that they would have access and use of Lot A, while the Yacht Club continues to store boats on Lot B. After the boats go in the water and Lot B is cleared, Dexter would then occupy Lot B. And after the boating season, the Yacht Club would have use of Lot A for storage. So that is conceptually how this would be structured. The lease agreements would reflect, with Dexter Southfield would reflect that. And then ultimately what we would need to do is decide in terms of issuing potentially new RFP for Lot A to secure the Yacht Club long-term in terms of this 5-year rolling lease agreements that we've been doing with the other entities down there, if that's a commitment the town's willing to make to the Yacht Club on Lot A. It'll take a little bit more of coordination between all the groups to maximize the storage to everybody's benefit. But I think we have a plan here that will work well, and Dexter is very interested in being down there and very interested in working and being a good neighbor to both the Yacht Club and to the Rowing Club. So that's my summary for now. Happy to take any questions.
Richard, do you want to go next?
No, I just want to thank. I agree. The only one thing I want to add, because this goes back to Cheryl Tagayas and the work of the MPIC, and specifically all the work that was done, Terry Driscoll, Vic Burke, the MAPC work, Bill Clark, where they created the concepts for a composite dock to be used specifically for passive and recreational, crew, canoes, kayaks. That probably would have cost us $50,000 to do this. So Dexter, in addition to leasing Lot B, is going to install this dock for us at no cost. Put in and take it out, and that's just this total package is just a win-win. And as you know, Mike, you've been there 7 years as well. This has been a ton of work, and I want to thank Roxanne, the committee, the former committee members, everyone on the MPIC, the people from 88 Wharf, the Yacht Club, Milton Rowing Club. I really want to thank Terry Driscoll, he's one of the founding members. He's a member of the Yacht Club, but also one of the founders of the Ponset Crew, the Ponset Row, which was Milton High School Yacht Club. All they've done for so long, because as you know, this is really a massive thing. So I'll leave it at that.
Certainly, you deserve credit on this as well, Richard, for your long-standing work.
That's why my hair's gray.
That's right. Other comments or questions? Ms. Musto.
Thank you. I wanted to thank Richard for serving as long as he has on that committee. I'm obviously newer to the committee, but I'm very pleased that we're able to make it work. And so thank you to Mr. Milano for, working collaboratively and trying to bring, both Dexter and the Yacht Club together, and seeing how we can make it work so that we can keep the Yacht Club down there and they get use of what they need, and that Dexter gets what they need, and we get a new low-profile dock in the process as well. So to me, that's a win, and so I really want to thank all the parties involved in that.
Other comments or questions? So, do we want a motion to approve the Lot B proposals for those two as listed here on the agenda?
So it would be the lease agreements with Dexter Southfield, and then if the board wishes, then we can move on to a Lot A RFP at the next meeting.
Okay, so it'd be Lot B with Dexter Southfield, not with the Yacht.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chair.
I'll second.
All right, so the motion is to approve the Milton Landing Lot B proposal for Dexter Southfield only. Is that correct, Mr. All right, so that's the motion. Thank you, Mr. Wells. Thank you, Ms. Musto. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zoll is yes. All right, and so we'll have a Lot A proposal for the Yacht Club perhaps at our next meeting or soon thereafter?
Yeah, we'll have to issue an RFP and then go from there with them.
Okay, fair enough. All right, item 11, discussion approval update annual town meeting on May 6, 2024. Mr. Milano.
Sure, Mr. Chair, I know we have executive sessions to get to. This first sub-item warrant article I think would be great to do, but I don't know that we need to consume time when we have an important item in executive session to get to. And then item B, I think, there's nothing imminently time sensitive about that. That's a proposal I want to discuss with the board, so I think we can take that up at a future meeting.
Without objection, we'll defer discussion of item 11.
No objection.
All right. Item 12, discussion approval of 12A, Equity and Justice for All Advisory Committee appointment.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move to appoint Rabbi Alfred Benjamin to the Equity and Justice Equity and Justice for All Committee for a term to expire on June 30th, 2025.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Absolutely not. No, I'm only kidding. Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mrs. Zulish, yes. Thank you. Item 13 is a request of the library to reserve the Baron Hugo Gazebo for the children's concert featuring Ben Anna Band. That's not your band, is it? Ben?
Unfortunately,
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the request of Milton Public Library for the use of the town green and Baron Hugo Gazebo, the Milton Public Library's annual picnic and children's concert featuring Ben Anna Band on June 5th, 2024, 11 p.m. to 12 midnight. No, I think that's 11 a.m. to 12.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor, Ms. Musto?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. No, it's fine. Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. Item 14, Town Administrator's Report.
I'll just speak. Sorry, let me restart over. All I wanted to say was that there's a lot of effort that goes into running an election. The town clerk's office was flat out for several weeks. They got no time to relax and jumped right into the presidential primary, which was actually occurring all along. So to Sue Galvin, Gail Neville, Caitlin Neville, Bill Neville, and
You have to
Karen,
remember Bill Neville, very important.
and Karen and Ms. Martin and everybody down there that's there every day, to all the other workers who come in, which feels like they've been in the building since the new year. Huge thank you. We can't pull these elections off without them, and they can get back to work tomorrow because early voting is taking place for the presidential primary, mail-in voting is taking place, and the presidential primary is next Tuesday, so don't forget to vote.
All right, thank you.
Here,
Mr.
here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. Chair's report, we're going to defer on that because we do have several items in executive session and the hour is late. Item 16 we already discussed. Item 17, future meeting dates, Tuesday, March 12th, 2024, Tuesday, March 26th, 2024. Any issues there? Seeing none. Item 17, future agenda items. Anything to be raised? That you can always send anything to me by email.
On?
Sure.
Probably cheaper to buy them now.
All right. Mr. Milano, we have 1, 2, 3.
I wasn't agreeing.
How many do we have? 1, 2, 6. Are
think.
these all of moment? All of these executive sessions?
Number 20 we have handled, so that can be skipped. The others, 22, 23, 24 are brief updates, and
All right.
won't take much time.
So, all right. So,
Which one we're skipping, 20?
Yes.
so we're skipping 20. The
Milton Landing. Yep.
Okay. All right. So, I will begin. I move to enter into an executive session and adjourn from open session for for discussion regarding strategy with respect to litigation that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has commenced against the town of Milton. We have in the agenda threatened to commence, but it's commenced against the town relating to Mass General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 3A. Based on my belief that discussion of this matter in open session may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the Select Board, the Select Board will not return to open session. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. Second, I move to enter into executive session and adjourn from open session to discuss a response to an open meeting law complaint received on February 5th, 2024, filed by Timothy Lyons against the Milton Select Board and/or Select Board members Michael Zulus, Aaron Bradley, and Benjamin Zoll, based on my belief that discussion of this matter in open session may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the Select Board. The Select Board will not return to open session.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? Any further discussion? Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr.
Sorry.
Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. Not sure what I did, but I'm sure it was. I'm sure you'll tell me later on.
Oh, I wasn't paying attention for a second. That's
No,
why.
it wasn't. It wasn't you. They're laughing at me for some reason, but I'll
sorry.
find out. I'll find out later. Let's see. Item 22. I move to enter into executive session and adjourn from open session to discuss strategy with respect to threatened litigation against the town by a town employee, based on my belief that discussion of this matter in open session may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position and strategy of the Select Board. The Select Board will not return to open session. Any further discussion? Oh, I need a second.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mrs. Zulish, yes. Next, I move to enter into executive session and adjourn from open session to discuss litigation strategy with respect to litigation. The Risa King et al., the Patricia Leo, Town of Milton, and Milton Police Department, and John E. King, based on my belief that discussion of this matter in open session may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the Select Board. The Select Board will not return to open session.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yeah.
Doing that, yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. Finally, I move to enter into executive session and adjourn from open session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, Milton Firefighters Local 1116, based on my belief that discussion of this matter in open session may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the Select Board. The Select Board will not return to open session.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Abstain.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulus, yes. Thank you, everyone. We will see you again on March 12th, 2024. Thank you very much.